Hey hey. Welcome back to Heir vs X. We've got something fire today. Merlin and Morgan Le Fay found Harry at Godric's Hollow and Camelot magic made him heir of Excalibur. Likes and subs keep us going. Alright, story time. Chapter 1, The night Camelot answered the owl never made it. Dumbledore had sent it at 11:30, a tawny bird with a letter tucked under its wing and instructions to fly to Arabella Fig 3 streets over from number 4, Privet Drive. The letter was careful, measured, full of the kind of gentle authority that Dumbledore had spent 60 years perfecting. It explained the situation with the Potter boy. It made the Dursleys sound like a reasonable option. The owl got as far as the outskirts of Godric's Hollow before something made it bank hard left, circle twice, and land on a fence post with its feathers bristled and its amber eyes fixed on something it didn't have the capacity to understand. There were two people standing in the lane outside the ruined cottage, and the night around them was doing something that night wasn't supposed to do. It was bending. Not dramatically, no great columns of light or theatrical darkness, just a subtle, deep warping, the way heat ripples off summer tarmac, except this was cold and ancient and had nothing to do with temperature. The grass at their feet was growing faster than grass grew. The stars overhead were slightly too bright and slightly too close. The owl decided it had urgent business elsewhere and left. Morgan Le Fay had been in worse places. She'd stood in the ruins of Camelot when the stones were still warm. She'd walked the field at Camlin while the crows were still deciding. She had a personal and extensively documented history with destruction, with aftermath, with the particular silence that follows something that cannot be undone. But there was something about Godric's Hollow at midnight on the 1st of November, 1981, that made even her go quiet. The cottage had taken the worst of it through the upper floor. The roof on the right side had simply ceased to exist, just open sky where a child's bedroom used to be, the stars cold and indifferent through the gap. The front wall still stood, mostly, though the door hung at a wrong angle and every window had blown outward. There was a smell to the air that Morgan recognized from very old, very terrible magic, something scorched and turned and cancelled, like a fire that had burned itself by burning too hot. She walked through the garden with her hands loose at her sides, reading the residue of it the way a tracker reads disturbed earth. The killing curse was there, layered twice. She could feel where Lily Potter had died in the doorway of the upstairs room, a cold flat note that made her jaw tighten. James Potter's trace was downstairs, by the sitting room, a different note but the same flat finality. What was in the upstairs room was something else entirely. "You feel that?" she said. "I'm standing in it," Merlin said, from directly behind her. She hadn't heard him come up the path. After 1500 years she still found that mildly irritating. He was looking up at the ruined bedroom, his hands in the pockets of a coat that was somehow simultaneously tweed and wrong, the kind of garment that existed in the space between modern and ancient and belonged fully to neither. His face, when she glanced at it, was doing the thing it only did when something had genuinely surprised him. Not the performative surprise he deployed for students and kings and people he was managing. The real kind. The quiet kind. Avada Kedavra, she said. Reflected. Which means the caster is either dead or something considerably worse than dead. She paused. "Do we know this man?" "Tom Riddle," Merlin said. "I've been watching him for about 20 years. He started calling himself Lord Voldemort somewhere in the 60s, which tells you everything you need to know about his relationship with subtlety." He tilted his head. "He's not dead, Morgan." "No," she agreed. "He's not." She could feel it too, the absence of a proper death anywhere in the magical residue of the place. Voldemort's magic had rebounded and destroyed its own caster's body, yes, but there was no clean cessation. Just a kind of terrible remainder, like a fraction that refused to resolve. "He's persisting somehow." "What did he do to himself?" "Several things I suspect we'd both find distasteful." She made a short sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "We should have dealt with him years ago. We agreed not to interfere with, I know what we agreed." She started up the path toward the broken front door. I'm simply noting, retrospectively, that it was a poor agreement. The inside of the cottage was worse than the outside, which was usually how it went. The sitting room was intact enough, a sofa, a cold fireplace, photographs on the walls showing a young red-haired woman and a dark-haired man with glasses, laughing in various locations. Morgan glanced at them without stopping. James Potter. Lily Evans that was. She'd known of them rather than known them, had tracked the bloodlines academically more than personally, but seeing them laughing in photographs in a house that smelled of their deaths made something tighten behind her sternum. She took the stairs. The second step from the top had collapsed inward, so she stepped over it without breaking stride, and then she was in the doorway of the child's room and she stopped. The room was destroyed. Crib overturned. The wall above it blasted outward in a perfect circle, the night sky visible through the gap. Plaster dust still shifting in the cold air. The residue of the killing curse was so thick here it was almost visible, a dark shimmer that her eyes kept trying to resolve into shapes. And in the rubble, sitting up against the overturned crib with his legs straight out in front of him and a look of profound curiosity on his face, was a child of approximately 15 months. He had dark hair that was already doing something structurally improbable. He had his mother's eyes, green, specific, the kind of green that wasn't quite a natural color. He had a cut on his forehead in the shape of a bolt of lightning, which was already sealed, the blood dried to a thin dark line. He was looking at Morgan with an expression that babies weren't supposed to have. Not fear, not confusion, not the standard infant bewilderment at the universe. Something more like assessment. Like he was working something out. "Hello," Morgan said. The baby blinked. Then he held up one hand and the plaster dust around him lifted an inch off the floor, swirled in a lazy spiral, and settled again. Morgan stood very still for 3 full seconds. Then she turned her head toward the doorway and said, "Merlin. Come up here." He appeared in the doorway and saw the child and went completely motionless in the way that Merlin only went motionless when something had knocked the considerable wind out of him. "Oh," he said. "Yes. Yes." He walked into the room slowly, stepping around the larger pieces of debris, and crouched down in front of the child with his forearms on his knees, studying him at eye level. The baby studied him back with the same unnerving focus, and then, without any apparent reason, laughed. A short, delighted sound, like something had struck him as genuinely funny. Merlin's expression did something complicated. "What's his name?" "Harry. Harry James Potter." Morgan crouched beside him, not quite at the same angle. Born July 31, 1980. His mother was Lily Evans, Muggle-born, exceptional, one of the finest practitioners of charm work and ancient ward theory of her generation. She paused. I monitored her work from a distance. She had instincts for old magic that most pureblood spend centuries failing to develop. And his father? James Potter. Old blood. Very old. She said it in a certain tone, and Merlin looked at her sharply. How old? I verified the lineage 3 months ago when I first started watching Riddle's movements and cross-referencing his targets. She held the child's gaze, he was still watching her with that unnerving assessment. The Potter line traces through 17 documented generations of magical inheritance to a single convergence point in the late 5th century. She let that sit for a moment. Southwestern Britain. A court of some historical significance. Merlin was very quiet. Arthur's line didn't end at Camelot, Morgan said. It just went quiet. People do, when the world stops being safe for them. She reached out and very gently touched the lightning bolt cut on the child's forehead. The ancient magic on her fingertips resonated with something in the wound, not dark, not cursed, but marked. Intentional. Lily Potter performed a sacrificial ward the likes of which I haven't encountered since Nimue, Merlin said quietly. Since Nimue, she agreed. She gave her life as the anchor. Love as the binding agent. The magic doesn't just protect him, it turned the killing curse back on itself, like a mirror held up to a lie. She sat back on her heels. He survived Avada Kedavra, Merlin. He is 15 months old and he survived the unforgivable killing curse, and the only mark on him is a scar on his forehead and the fact that he's apparently decided to play with the plaster dust. The plaster dust spiraled again. The child looked at it with satisfaction. The ley lines, Merlin said, almost to himself. Morgan nodded. Godric's Hollow is built on a convergence. Has been since before the village. Long before Gryffindor chose this place, he chose it because of the convergence, the way old magic always finds itself. 3 lines cross directly beneath this house. She looked at the blown-out wall, at the cold stars through the gap. When the curse reflected, when that much compressed dark magic reversed and discharged all at once directly above a triple convergence, the ground heard it. And responded. The ground always responds, Morgan said. We just usually don't have a Pendragon bloodline sitting in the middle of it when it does. Merlin reached out and let the child grab his finger, which Harry did immediately and with considerable grip strength for someone his size. Merlin looked down at the tiny hand wrapped around his index finger and his face to the complicated thing again, the thing Morgan had learned to read over centuries of watching him try to pretend he didn't feel things as sharply as he did. Dumbledore has a plan for him, Merlin said. He'll have him in Surrey by morning. A blood ward with the mother's sister, Petunia Desley, née Evans. He's been working toward it since before tonight. The prophecy, the protection, the chosen one narrative. He paused. He's not wrong about the blood ward. Lily's magic in a line relative's home, the protection holds until the boy comes of age. It is, genuinely, sound protective theory. It's also, Morgan said evenly, a 10-year sentence in a house with people who will hate him for what he is. He won't know to expect better. No. Her voice was flat. He won't. Children who don't know to expect better become adults who don't ask for it. She looked at Harry, who had transferred his attention from Merlin's finger to a piece of plaster that was now rotating slowly about 6 inches above the floor. I spent 600 years being history's villain because the story was written by men who never asked why I did what I did. They just wrote what was convenient. She stood up. I am not putting Arthur's heir in a cupboard in Surrey. Merlin looked up at her. Morgan, don't, she said, not unkindly. Don't give me the pragmatic argument. I know the pragmatic argument. I've made the pragmatic argument. I'm tired of it. A long silence. The wind moved through the blown-out wall and stirred the plaster dust and made the photographs on the mantelpiece downstairs shift slightly. From somewhere down the lane came the distant sound of a motorbike, Sirius Black, Morgan noted, either coming here or having just left, the timing ambiguous in the dark. Merlin stood up. He looked at the child for a long moment with an expression that Morgan could only have described as reckoning. The last time, he said slowly, that I had the opportunity to protect an heir of that line and chose the complicated path, we don't need to revisit Camelot. I'm not revisiting it. I'm citing it as relevant precedent. He looked at her. You want to take him? We should take him. It will overturn everything. Dumbledore's plan, the prophecy's expected shape, the entire structure he's built around the boy as a sacrificial variable in a war against Riddle. He said it without judgment. Just facts. The world he's prepared Harry Potter for will not have a Harry Potter in it. And Riddle is still out there, Morgan. Not dead. Persisting. When he returns, and he will return to a world that expected a different Harry Potter. Good, Morgan said simply. Merlin looked at her. Then he looked at Harry, who had gotten bored with the plaster and was now trying to pull himself upright using the overturned crib leg, with the focused determination of someone who had decided standing was the next logical project. Merlin made a sound that was almost a laugh. He has the Pendragon stubbornness already. He has all of it already, Morgan said. You felt the magic in this room when you walked in. That convergence response wasn't random, Merlin. The ley lines didn't just happen to discharge when the curse reflected. They recognized him. The same way Excalibur recognized Arthur, not as a destination but as a confirmation. Something that had always been true just became impossible to ignore. Excalibur is in the vault. Excalibur has been in the vault for 15 centuries waiting for a reason to leave it. She looked at him steadily. We both know it. Another silence. Longer this time. Down in the village a church clock struck the quarter hour, 1:15 in the morning, the 1st of November, 1981, and the wizarding world was celebrating in the streets because they thought it was over and they didn't know yet that the thing they were afraid of had simply changed shape. Merlin crouched back down in front of Harry. The child looked at him with those green eyes, Lily's eyes, and the assessment in them was so clear and so present that it was genuinely difficult to remember this was a 15-month-old who'd had the worst night of his life and should by any reasonable measure be crying. Harry, Merlin said. The child said something that was not quite a word but had the architecture of one. His hand came up and grabbed Merlin's finger again. Right, Merlin said quietly. All right. He straightened up and looked at Morgan. We do it properly. No hiding him, no lying about what he is or where he comes from. He knows his parents' story, the whole of it, the moment he's old enough to hold it. He knows the war, the prophecy, riddle, everything. He held her gaze. And we do not make him into us, Morgan. We teach him, we train him, we give him every tool we know how to give. But what he does with it is his. Not ours. Not Arthur's ghost. His. Morgan was quiet for a moment. Agreed, she said. Though I'd note that Pendragon heirs have historically been rather difficult to steer in any direction they haven't already chosen. Yes, Merlin said, with something that was definitely a smile now. I'm counting on it. He reached down and picked up Harry Potter with the practiced ease of someone who had, in various centuries, managed considerably more complicated things than an infant. Harry looked up at him with absolute composure, grabbed a fistful of Merlin's lapel, and held on. Morgan produced a soft blanket from somewhere. She didn't explain where, and Merlin had stopped asking about her spatial magic approximately 1200 years ago, and wrapped it around the child with a precise efficiency that was almost tender. Almost. What about the motorbike? Merlin asked. Black was here, or nearly. Sirius Black is innocent, Morgan said. And he'll be in Azkaban by morning for a crime he didn't commit, because Peter Pettigrew is alive and wearing a different face. She said it without inflection, a fact to be filed. We can't address that tonight without revealing ourselves. But we address it. Eventually. Yes. She turned toward the broken stairs. Come. We need to be gone before Dumbledore's man arrives. I believe he's sending Hagrid. Rubeus Hagrid is not going to be easy to explain to if he sees us walking out of here with the boy. Then we'll be quick. She paused at the top of the stairs and looked back at the room, the wreckage, the cold stars through the gap in the roof, the dark residue of magic that would take years to fully disperse. Her eyes moved once to the doorway where Lily Potter had died and stayed there for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Then she went downstairs. The night outside was cold and the village was quiet. One house 3 doors down had a light on, someone sitting up with grief or insomnia or ordinary ignorance of what had just happened 40 yards away. A cat sat on a wall across the lane and watched them with the particular self-possession of cats near magical events, which was to say it watched them the way it watched everything, which was to say it was almost certainly not a cat. Morgan noticed the cat immediately and Merlin noticed Morgan notice it, and neither of them said anything because they had both been around long enough to know that Albus Dumbledore's surveillance methods were his own business and would make no difference tonight. Merlin carried Harry, who had fallen asleep with his head on Merlin's shoulder and his fist still twisted in the lapel of his coat. The lightning scar was visible above the blanket line, red against pale skin, and the magic in it, the layered complexity of Lily's sacrifice and the curse's reflection and the ley line resonance, was humming at a frequency that Merlin could feel in his back teeth. He'll need a name for this world, Morgan said, as they walked down the lane away from the cottage. Harry Potter is too visible. Not forever, eventually the name becomes his again, on his terms. But while he's small. Harry, Merlin said. We keep Harry. The other name can be Emery's. He glanced at her. It's not as if it hasn't served before. Morgan made a sound. Harry Emery's. He'll hate it when he finds out why. He'll think it's funny when he finds out why. He just laughed at plaster dust, Morgan. He's going to be, Merlin paused, searching for the word. Exactly what he needs to be, Morgan said. They reached the end of the lane. The main road was empty in both directions, the night absolute and quiet. Morgan made a gesture that was less like casting a spell and more like someone who'd been doing this long enough that the magic had become as automatic as breathing, a folding of space, a door in the air, the quality of existence somewhere else bleeding through. Beyond it was warmth and firelight and a building that existed in a geography that no Ministry of Magic cartographer had ever mapped, because it predated the Ministry of Magic by roughly 1,000 years and had no interest in being found. Merlin stepped through with Harry asleep against his shoulder. Morgan paused in the opening and looked back at Godric's Hollow one last time, the broken cottage visible down the lane, the light in the window 3 doors down, the cat on the wall which was absolutely not a cat. Albus, she said, quietly, in the direction of the cat, you built a very good plan. I'm sorry it won't go the way you intended. She held the cat's gaze for a moment. The boy will be safe. More than safe. You have my word, for whatever that's worth to you after everything. The cat blinked, once, slowly. Morgan stepped through the door and closed it behind her. Inside, the building arranged itself around them in the way it always did, not a house exactly, not a tower exactly, something that had been continuously modified by two people with absolute magical power and completely incompatible aesthetics over 15 centuries and had arrived at a kind of furious architectural compromise. High ceilings and stone walls softened by Morgan's additions, tapestries that weren't decorative but functional, a layering of wards so dense and old that they were structurally part of the building. Books on every surface, most of them Merlin's, many of them in languages that no longer had living speakers. A fire in a hearth that was always burning, for reasons Merlin had explained once in the 6th century and Morgan had categorically refused to accept as sufficient reason. Merlin carried Harry to the room that had been prepared, not recently prepared, not as if they'd expected this, but prepared in the way that places sometimes are when they're built by people who have learned to expect everything. A small room off the main hall, stone walls, a window that looked out onto hills that were not any specific hills in any specific country but were green and old and right. A crib, because Morgan had put one there in 1974 and neither of them had asked why. Harry went down into the crib without waking. The fist unclenched from Merlin's lapel with reluctance, the last thread of grip holding until the last possible moment, which Merlin filed away as an observation that would be relevant later. He stood looking at the child for a moment. The fire from the hall threw soft light through the open doorway and the lightning scar caught it, that thin red line, Lily Potter's sacrifice made visible. I failed Arthur, he said. Not to Morgan specifically. Just out loud. You did, she said, from behind him. No softening it. That was one of the things he'd always valued about her, when he wasn't finding it infuriating. And you carry it like it was yesterday and it was 1,500 years ago and some days those are the same thing. She moved to stand beside him, both of them looking at the sleeping child. You won't fail this one. You don't know that. No, she agreed. I know that the last time you had the chance, you were alone and operating under a set of beliefs about fate and prophecy and the shape of history that I will charitably describe as naive. This time, she left it open. This time you're here, he said. This time I'm here, she confirmed. And I am a great deal less sentimental about fate than you are, and someone needs to be. Merlin almost smiled. You put a crib in that room in 1974. A beat. The room needed furniture, Morgan said. It needed furniture in 1974. Architecture is about anticipation. She walked away from the doorway, back toward the fire. Let him sleep. We have a great deal to discuss. Merlin stayed a moment longer, looking at the dark-haired child with his mother's eyes and his father's hair and a scar that held more magic per square centimeter than most wizards wielded in a lifetime. The ley line resonance was still there, fainter now, a background hum. He reached down and tucked the edge of the blanket more securely, for no practical reason. Then he went to talk to Morgan about the next 15 years. 3 hours later, as the first pale edge of dawn touched the hills outside the window, Harry Potter stirred in his crib in a building that didn't exist on any map, raised his head, looked around at his new surroundings with those green eyes, and found them satisfactory. The plaster dust was gone, but there was a small piece of loose thread on the blanket edge, and he addressed himself to this new problem with total commitment. 47 miles away, Rubeus Hagrid arrived at Godric's Hollow on Sirius Black's motorbike, found the cottage empty, found no infant, and stood in the lane for a very long time with his hands in his hair before going to find a way to tell Dumbledore. In a house in Surrey, a spare bedroom waited with the lights off. It would go on waiting. Chapter 2, The Boy Raised on Old Magic 10 years was nothing. That was the thing about living as long as Merlin had, a decade was a breath, a blink, the time it took to finish one thought and begin another. He'd watched empires metabolize in less. He'd outlasted languages, bloodlines, entire schools of magical philosophy that had burned bright for a century and then gone quiet as if they'd never existed. 10 years was nothing. Except that it wasn't, and he knew it wasn't, because the child who'd fallen asleep gripping his lapel in the ruins of Godric's Hollow had become, with a speed that was genuinely alarming even by the standards of someone who'd watched everything, a 10-year-old boy who was currently 40 feet up a cliff face arguing with the wind. Not metaphorically. Actually arguing. Out loud. You shifted, Harry called down, his voice carrying easily on the morning air. His fingers were wedged into a crack in the granite and his feet were on a ledge about the width of a playing card, and he was looking up at the overhang above him with an expression of focused irritation. You were coming from the northwest and then you shifted east, and I was in the middle of calculating the adjustment and you shifted again. The wind does not negotiate, Morgan said, from where she stood on the cliff top above him. I know the wind doesn't negotiate, that's not what I'm saying there's a pattern, and if you'd let me finish the calculation, patterns end. Then what? Harry was quiet for a moment, the wind moving around him, his dark hair doing several things simultaneously. He had grown into those green eyes, they were too sharp for 10, too present, the kind of eyes that made adults instinctively check what they'd said before they finished saying it. He had his father's build starting to show, lean and quick, and he had something neither parent had contributed, something that was older than both of them, a quality of stillness at the center of him that showed up when he was thinking and made him look, in those moments, profoundly ancient. Which was, Merlin had noted more than once, what happened when you raised someone on 15 centuries of compressed experience. Then I improvise, Harry said. But I want to understand the pattern first. Why? Because improvisation without understanding is just guessing, and guessing gets you killed. He reached up and found the next hold. You told me that. Third lesson, age 6. I wrote it down. Morgan's expression from the cliff top was impossible to read, which meant she was pleased. Then finish your calculation and come up. I'm trying. The wind shifted again, hard, southwest now, and Harry's left foot slipped off the ledge. He didn't fall. His right hand shot out to the rock, found a crack that wasn't quite big enough, and made it big enough through approximately 2 seconds of wandless magic that was so reflexive and so fast that it looked less like a spell and more like a physical response, the way a hand catches a dropped glass before the mind has consciously registered the drop. He hung there for a moment, both hands in the rock, feet dangling, the sea visible 60 feet below him through the morning mist. He looked down at the water. Then up at Morgan. I calculated wrong, he said. Yes. The wind shifted while I was mid-sequence. Yes. So the lesson is that patterns and improvisation aren't actually separate skills, they're the same skill from different angles. Morgan was quiet for a beat. Come up, she said. He came up. Not quickly, he did it properly, finding each hold with deliberate care, the wandless magic available but held in reserve, used only where the rock genuinely wouldn't cooperate. Merlin had been watching from further along the cliff top, sitting on a flat stone with a cup of tea that was doing something thermodynamically complex because it had been sitting in the cold air for 20 minutes and was still steaming. He watched Harry clear the overhang with a specific move that hooked his left elbow over the lip and then used the momentum of it to swing his right leg up, and he said nothing but wrote something very small in the margin of the book in his lap. Harry pulled himself onto the cliff top and stood up. His hands were chalked and his knees were wet from the rock and he was breathing hard but evenly, the kind of breath that comes from effort rather than fear. He looked at Morgan. Was the second wind shift deliberate? He asked. What do you think? I think yes, because it happened at exactly the moment I had enough of the pattern to get comfortable, and you said comfortable is the most dangerous place to be. Then you have your answer, Morgan said, and handed him a water flask. He drank, looked out at the sea, grey and enormous and genuinely indifferent, and then looked back at her. Can we do it again from the south face? The wind patterns are different there and I want to, after breakfast, Merlin said, from his rock. Harry turned. You were watching the whole time. I'm always watching. You could have said something when my foot slipped. You didn't need me to. Harry considered this with the seriousness he applied to most things, decided it was fair, and dropped down to sit cross-legged on the cliff-top grass beside Merlin's rock. He was wearing worn trousers and a dark shirt that was slightly too big for him. Morgan had a complicated relationship with children's clothing sizing that defaulted to they'll grow into it, and his glasses were a concession to physical reality that he'd accepted at age 8 with philosophical resignation after trying and failing for 2 months to correct his eyesight wandlessly. Merlin, he said. Harry. If Excalibur can only be wielded by someone Arthur's bloodline recognizes as worthy, where did you read about Excalibur? Third shelf, blue binding, the one you put a notice me not charm on. Harry met his look. I've known the charm was there since I was 8. I just didn't say anything because I wanted to finish reading first. He picked up a piece of grass and turned it between his fingers. If the sword recognizes worthiness, is that a fixed threshold or does it change based on what the wielder needs to do? Merlin closed his book and looked at the boy properly. This was a habit Harry had, this conversational ambush. He'd bring something up sideways, in the aftermath of something else, when the person he was asking was still processing the previous exchange. Merlin suspected he'd developed it specifically because Morgan was difficult to catch head-on and Harry had identified a viable angle of approach at approximately age 7. What makes you ask it that way? Merlin said. Because a fixed threshold means worthiness is a state, like a door that's either open or locked. But if it changes based on what's needed, then worthiness is more like, Harry frowned, looking for the word. A conversation. Between the sword and the person holding it. What difference does it make? If it's a fixed state, then I either am or I'm not, and there's not much I can do about it. If it's a conversation, then it matters how I show up to it. He looked at Merlin. Which one is it? A long moment. The wind came off the sea and moved through the grass and Merlin's tea continued its thermodynamic rebellion. Nobody has held that sword since Arthur, Merlin said. So the honest answer is that I don't know which one it is, because we haven't had a test case in 15 centuries. That's not actually an answer. No. It's an honest non-answer, which is different and more useful than a false answer. Merlin picked up his tea. What I believe, for whatever it's worth, I believe the sword is smarter than either of those options. I think it reads something that doesn't have a name, something between intent and nature and history, and I think it makes a judgment that is more nuanced than a door lock and more binding than a conversation. He paused. I think when the time comes, you'll know what it said. Harry absorbed this. The sea moved far below them. Morgan thinks I should access the vault before Hogwarts, he said. Does she? She says walking into that world without the full picture of what I am is tactically weak. Morgan thinks most situations are best approached as if they're tactical problems. She's usually right. She is usually right, Merlin agreed, with the tone of someone who had been intermittently furious about this for a very long time. What do you think? Harry was quiet for a moment. A long one, for him. He was usually quicker than this, the thinking fast and visible, conclusions arriving like express trains. But this one he was turning carefully. I think, he said finally, that I want to know who I am before other people start telling me. He looked up. The wizarding world has a story about Harry Potter. Merlin's shown me the newspapers, I know what they think I am. The boy who lived. He said it flatly, without bitterness, just assessment. If I go in without the full picture, that story fills the gaps. It becomes part of how I understand myself even if I don't want it to. He set down the piece of grass. I want the gaps filled before I go. Merlin looked at him for a moment. Then at Morgan, who had moved to stand a short distance away and was looking at the sea with her back to them, which meant she'd heard every word and was pretending not to. Talk to Morgan this evening, Merlin said. Tell her what you just told me, in those words. Why? Because she needs to hear you say it. Harry looked at Morgan's back, thoughtful. He'd learned early to read the geometry of Morgan's posture, how she stood when she was working through something versus when she'd already solved it, how the set of her shoulders changed when something touched old wounds she hadn't finished with yet. Right now she was standing in the particular way she stood when something had moved her and she was deciding what to do about that. Okay, he said. He stood up, stretched, and looked back at the south cliff face with the expression of someone mentally mapping holds. After breakfast. South face. Different wind patterns. After breakfast, Morgan confirmed, without turning around. The building that didn't exist on any map had no official name, but Harry had called it the Hall since he was small and the name had stuck with the adhesion of all childhood names for things, simple, accurate, impossible to dislodge. It sat in a geography that was technically England but only technically, the way technically was doing a lot of work in a sentence, on hills that were old enough to have opinions. The nearest village was 3 miles down a road that existed seasonally and seemed confused about which season it was currently experiencing. Inside, Merlin had made breakfast, which meant there were eggs and toast and a pot of tea and also, inexplicably, a small dish of something that appeared to be last century's marmalade, which Harry ate without comment because he'd grown up eating it and had no reference point for comparison. Morgan had contributed fruit from the garden, which she grew with the same focused precision she brought to everything else. The apple trees outside bore 3 varieties that no longer existed commercially and the herb garden was a functioning pharmacopoeia that could probably have kept a medieval hospital stocked. They ate at the long table in the hall proper, the fire going, the morning light coming through the high windows at the angle it always came through in autumn, long and amber and honest. There were books on the table because there were always books on the table, but they'd learned to stack them to one side during meals after Harry, at age 5, had appended an ink bottle onto something Merlin had spent 3 months transcribing. Tell me about the Hogwarts letter, Harry said, between pieces of toast. It will come on your birthday, Morgan said. July 31st. 11 months from now. Will Dumbledore send it? Dumbledore doesn't send them individually. They're generated by the Hogwarts registry, it's automatic. Your name was entered at birth. She cut her apple with the efficient precision she cut everything. He will, however, become aware of the letter's destination when it's delivered. Which will tell him you're alive and accessible. And not in Surrey, Harry said. Not in Surrey, Morgan confirmed. Harry turned this over. He's been looking for me. Intermittently, Merlin said. He knows you didn't go to the Dursleys. He knows Hagrid found an empty house. He's had people looking quietly for years, not aggressively, not with any public apparatus, because announcing that the boy who lived is missing would cause a panic he's been very careful to avoid. He poured more tea. He is not stupid, Harry. I want to be clear on that. Dumbledore is one of the finest magical minds alive and he has been working from genuinely good intentions for a very long time. He had a plan for you that he believed was the safest possible path. A plan where I live in a cupboard in Surrey, Harry said. He didn't intend the cupboard specifically. But he intended Surrey. He intended small and hidden and not knowing what I am until he was ready to tell me. Harry's voice wasn't angry. It was clear, the way cold water is clear. He wanted to manage the variable. Yes, Merlin said, because lying to Harry had never been possible and he'd stopped attempting it approximately one day after they'd brought him here. That's exactly what he intended. And the prophecy. Both Merlin and Morgan went slightly still, a barely perceptible thing, but Harry caught it the way he caught everything. You know about the prophecy, Morgan said. It wasn't a question. Third shelf, blue binding, Harry said. There was a second notice me not on the back chapter. I read that one too. He looked between them. Neither one shall live while the other survives. That's the relevant line. Harry, Merlin started. I'm not upset, Harry said. I just want to understand it correctly. He set down his toast. A prophecy isn't an instruction manual. Morgan's written extensively on the self-fulfilling architecture of prophetic magic. The reason most prophecies come true isn't because the future is fixed, it's because people act on the prophecy in ways that make it true. Voldemort heard the prophecy and chose to attack me, which created the conditions for the prophecy to apply to us. Without his action, it might have dissolved. A silence. He's summarizing my thesis, Morgan said, to Merlin. He's doing it quite well, Merlin said. So the question, Harry continued, isn't what does the prophecy mean, the question is what actions create conditions where it becomes irrelevant. He picked up his toast again. Which means understanding Voldemort. Not just as an enemy but as a person. What he wanted, what he did to himself, why. He looked at Merlin directly. You said he's persisting. Horcruxes. Another still moment. Third shelf, Harry said, patiently. We need a better alarm on that shelf, Merlin said. You need a better alarm, Harry agreed, without apology. Horcruxes. He split his soul. Multiple times, from what I could piece together, though the chapter was frustratingly incomplete on the specifics. He leaned forward. How many? Morgan and Merlin exchanged a look that carried approximately 15 centuries of shared communication in it. It lasted about 2 seconds. We believe 7, Morgan said. 6 created intentionally plus the fragment that remained in his body. The 7th, an unintended one, was created the night he attacked you. Harry was very still. He made one inside me. Not inside you. On you. The scar. Morgan's voice was precise and completely steady. She'd decided years ago that Harry would always have the truth, and she delivered it the same way she delivered everything, without hedging. When the killing curse reflected and his body was destroyed, a fragment of his already mutilated soul had nowhere to go. Your mother's magic had just discharged, the most powerful sacrificial ward cast in 1,000 years. The ley lines were resonating. The scar was the point of contact. She met his eyes. A piece of Voldemort's soul lodged in your scar that night. Harry sat with this. The fire crackled. Outside the window the apple trees moved in the same wind that had been playing with him on the cliff. Can it be removed, he said, finally. Yes, Morgan said. Have you, not yet. It's not causing active harm and removing it prematurely, before your own magic has fully developed its natural defenses, carries risks we're not willing to take with your mind. She held his gaze. When the time is right, we will remove it cleanly, completely, and without damage to you. I have been working on the method for 9 years. It will work. Harry nodded. Slowly, once. Then he picked up his tea and drank it and looked at the fire for a moment, and the only evidence of what he was processing was the slight change in the quality of his stillness, deeper than usual, the ancient quality coming up. All right, he said. That was all. All right. Merlin found this extraordinary. He'd told kings their kingdoms were ending with more drama than this boy had just received the news that a Dark Lord's soul was living in his forehead, and Harry's response was all right, spoken with the absolute pragmatic acceptance of someone who had been raised to treat problems as things to be solved rather than things to be afraid of. "There's something else," Harry said, and now Merlin heard it, the careful tone, the one that meant he'd been building toward something. "There's always something else with you," Morgan said, almost fondly. "My parents." He turned the mug in his hands. "I know what you've told me. I know the shape of it, who they were, what they did, how they died. I've read everything you've let me read about them." He paused. "I want the rest. The things you haven't told me because you thought I wasn't ready." "What makes you think there's a rest?" Morgan asked. He looked at her steadily. "Because you always hesitate for exactly 3 seconds before you answer questions about my mother. You never hesitate about anything else." He let that sit. 3 seconds is a tell, Morgan. Morgan was quiet. Merlin very carefully did not say anything. "Your mother," Morgan said, finally, "was one of the most remarkable people I have encountered in 15 centuries of encountering people. She was Muggle-born in a world that treated that as a disadvantage, and she outperformed virtually everyone around her anyway. She was funny in a way that caught you off guard. She'd be quiet for a long time and then say one thing that undid the whole conversation." She paused. "She figured out, in the last months of her life, that you had Pendragon blood. She didn't know what it meant, she didn't have the full context, but she was too good a researcher not to find the thread once she started pulling." Harry was very still. She knew. She was working toward it. "I believe she was close." Morgan set down her apple. "The ward she cast the night she died, it was not a standard sacrificial protection. A standard sacrificial ward is love as the anchor, the caster's life as the price. Powerful, yes, but within documented parameters." She looked at the fire. "What Lily did was something older. She wove the protection into the Pendragon bloodline specifically, not into a general magical principle. She tied her sacrifice to the lineage, which is why the magic that responded was so catastrophically powerful, why the ley lines activated, why the curse didn't just fail but reversed." She looked at Harry. She knew what she was anchoring to, Harry. She may not have had all the words for it. But she knew. The fire. The apple trees. The morning light. "She did it on purpose," Harry said. "Everything your mother did," Morgan said, "she did on purpose." Harry was quiet for a long time. Not the working through a problem quiet, this was different, softer, the kind of quiet that asked to be left alone. Merlin and Morgan, who had between them navigated the emotional landscapes of kings and warlocks and the catastrophically powerful, recognized it and gave it the space it needed. After a while, Harry stood up, carried his plate to the side without being asked, and said, "I'm going to the library." "South face this afternoon," Morgan said. "South face this afternoon," he agreed, and went. The library occupied a room that had approximately 4 times the interior space the exterior dimensions should have allowed, which was a feature Merlin had installed in the 9th century and Morgan had subsequently expanded in the 12th with the competitive thoroughness she brought to all home improvements. The books were not organized by any system that would have been legible to a conventional librarian. They were organized by the logic of 2 people who'd been having an argument about the nature of magical knowledge for 1500 years, which meant there were sections that made perfect sense and sections that were entirely personal and a corner in the back that neither of them would explain. Harry went to a specific spot, not the 3rd shelf with the blue binding, a different place, lower and closer to the window. He pulled out a thin book with no title on the spine and sat down on the floor against the wall and opened it. It was a photograph album. Morgan had put it together when Harry was 4, she'd never explained how she'd gotten the photographs, and Harry had stopped asking because he'd eventually concluded that Morgan Le Fay, when she decided she wanted something, generally found a way to have it. The photographs were wizarding photographs, moving, the people in them alive with a specific quality of preserved animation. His mother, laughing at something off frame, her red hair bright in summer light. His father, mid-air on a broomstick, pulling a move that had no business working at that angle. Both of them together, in what looked like a kitchen, his mother saying something that made his father put his face in his hands with exasperated laughter. Harry sat on the library floor with his back against the wall and his knees pulled up and looked at his mother in the photographs and thought about a woman who had figured out the shape of her son's destiny and chosen, deliberately and precisely, to make it possible. He didn't cry. He wasn't built for crying in any conventional sense. Morgan's training and Merlin's relentless honesty had made him into someone who processed things forward rather than downward. But there was something in his chest that was specific and warm and had no practical application, that was simply the feeling of knowing he had been loved with exceptional intelligence, and he let himself feel it without doing anything about it. After 20 minutes he put the album back, stood up, went to the third shelf, ignored the blue binding entirely, and pulled out an advanced text on ward theory that he'd been working through for the past month. He had south face in the afternoon. He wanted to finish the chapter on wind-responsive shielding first. They were in the training courtyard after dinner, a space that the building had produced somewhere in the middle of its centuries-long architectural argument, open to the sky but sheltered by the building on 3 sides, the 4th side open to the hills. The stones underfoot were worn smooth by use and the walls held a depth of embedded spellwork that made the air feel slightly more present than air usually did. Morgan was running Harry through what she called response chains, a sequence of attacks and defenses where the rule was that you couldn't use the same technique twice in any single chain. It was a drill she developed over centuries of actual combat, and the reasoning was sound. In a genuine fight, an opponent adapted, so your responses had to be genuinely different each time, not just variations on a preferred approach. Harry was good at it. Better than good, he had a natural facility for lateral thinking in magical combat that Merlin privately attributed to the Pendragon blood and Morgan privately attributed to her teaching, and neither of them had yet resolved to each other's satisfaction. Again, Morgan said. Harry rolled his shoulder, slightly, the only evidence of the previous chain's cost. He'd taken a redirected binding charm to the left side 20 minutes ago and hadn't mentioned it, which meant it was minor enough to work through. He raised his hands, no wand, they were working wandless tonight, and said, "Ready." Morgan came at him differently this time, not a direct attack but a lateral approach, using the courtyard geometry, cutting off his right side. Harry read it 2 seconds before it arrived, shifted left, and responded with a pressure-based shield that Morgan hit and found unexpectedly solid. She adjusted mid-cast, changed the angle, came in low. He redirected her low attack upward, used its momentum, sent it back at her modified. She dispersed it and smiled, one corner, the way she smiled when he surprised her. Which meant he'd done something she hadn't expected. They went 4 more exchanges, fast, the magic in the courtyard air going taut and bright, and then Morgan stopped the chain with a palm-flat gesture and said, "What did you do in the 3rd exchange?" "Used your own momentum structure against you, modified it about 30 degrees and sent it back with a kinetic component added. You expected the modification to cost me time, so you came in while I was still completing it." He caught his breath. "You didn't expect the 3rd element." "What 3rd element?" "I added a disorientation thread while the modification was in the air. 2-layered cast. You hit the main working and the thread activated on contact." Morgan looked at him. "Show me where you learned 2-layered casting." "I didn't. I worked it out about 2 weeks ago in the library." He met her eyes. "It's not in any of the books. Not in those words, anyway. But there's a principle in the chapter on concurrent ward maintenance. You can hold 2 magical workings in separate hands if you treat them as genuinely independent processes rather than splitting your attention. I just applied it to offensive rather than defensive work." The courtyard was quiet. The hills were dark beyond the open side, the stars beginning. "Merlin," Morgan called. "I'm watching," Merlin called back, from somewhere in the building. "He invented 2-layered combat casting." A pause. "I know. I saw it in the 3rd exchange. Did you put that in any of the books?" "No. Then he derived it independently." "I know." Morgan looked at Harry, who who was watching this exchange with calm attention. How long did it take you to work it out? From the principle to the application? About 3 days. Getting the timing right took another week. He paused. It has limitations. You have to have both workings fully formed before you deploy them. You can't build the second one during the motion. I'm working on whether that can be changed. Can it? He considered. Probably. I haven't solved it yet. Morgan nodded, slowly. We'll work on it. She looked at him in the way she looked at him sometimes that Harry had never been able to fully decode, something between assessment and something warmer that she kept at a carefully maintained distance from the surface. You said something this morning. To Merlin, on the cliff top. About wanting the gaps filled before you go. Harry didn't move. You heard that. I hear everything. You know that. I was going to tell you this evening. Tell me now, she said. So he told her, the same thing, the same words, about the Wizarding World story about Harry Potter filling his gaps if he went in empty. About knowing who he was before other people tried to tell him. He watched her face while he said it and saw something move behind her eyes, something old and specific. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. I spent 300 years, she said finally, being defined by a narrative someone else wrote about me. Morgan Le Fay, Arthur's treacherous sister, Merlin's enemy, the dark mirror to Camelot's light. People who'd never met me made decisions based on that story. Treated me according to it. She paused. Most of them were wrong about everything except the part where I was dangerous. Harry waited. The difference between us, she said, is that I didn't realize the narrative was happening until I was already inside it. By the time I understood what was being written about me, I'd already made choices that confirmed enough of it that the correction became, she searched for the word, politically complex. I have an advantage, Harry said. I know the narrative before I step into it. You do. And I know who I am. She looked at him for a long moment. The training courtyard, the stars, the embedded spellwork humming at a low frequency in the walls around them. Harry stood in the middle of it with his hands loose at his sides and his green eyes on her and the quality of his stillness that was neither hers nor Merlin's but entirely his own. Yes, Morgan said. You do. She tilted her head. Vault tomorrow. Harry's eyebrows went up. Tomorrow? You've been ready for 2 years. I've been thorough about preparation. She said the last part with a precision that acknowledged she had possibly been thorough past the point of strict necessity. Tomorrow we go to Gringotts. You see what's yours. All of it. Harry held her gaze for a beat. Then he smiled, not the quick bright flash his father's photographs showed, but something quieter and more settled. The smile of someone who'd been building towards something for a long time and could finally see the door. All right, he said. What time? Dawn, Morgan said. Dress properly. Goblins respect formality. I don't own anything formal. You've been buying me clothes that I'll grow into. You've grown into most of them. The blue shirt has 6 inches of sleeve left. Wear the gray one, Merlin called, from inside. They both looked at the building. Morgan made a short sound that was as close as she usually came to laughing. Harry grinned, full and real this time, and it lit his face in a way that was completely his own, inherited from nobody, grown in the space between an ancient sorcerer's dry wit and a sorceress's fierce precision and 10 years of living in a building that didn't exist on any map. He bent to pick up the water flask from the courtyard floor and said, I'm going to work on the 2-layer timing problem until I'm tired. Don't work past midnight, Morgan said. You always say that. You always ignore it. Then why do you keep saying it? She looked at him. Because one day you'll listen and then I'll have been right. He laughed, actual, full, the kind that had no angle on it, and went inside, and the building received him with the quiet confidence of somewhere that had been his for exactly as long as it needed to be. Morgan stood in the courtyard for a moment after he'd gone, looking at the empty space where he'd stood, the walls with their humming spellwork, the hills dark and old beyond the open side. "He's ready," she said. "I know," Merlin said, from the doorway. He was holding 2 cups of tea, because he always appeared with 2 cups of tea at the end of training, which was either a thoughtful habit or an absolute statement of intent that he was going to stand there regardless. He handed her one. "Ready for Gringotts, or ready for all of it?" Morgan drank her tea. "Yes," she said. Chapter 3, The Sword That Remembers Gringotts opened at 8:30. They arrived at 15:15, which was Morgan's way of saying they were exactly on time, and if Gringotts wasn't ready for them, that was Gringotts' problem. The leaky cauldron was already warm with morning customers when they came through it, Harry pulling the hood of his coat down as soon as they were inside, Morgan not bothering with a hood at all because Morgan Le Fay had spent the better part of 15 centuries being exactly as visible as she chose to be, and this morning she chose entirely visible. Nobody recognized her. That was the useful thing about being a figure from history rather than from current events. People had a mental image that involved flowing robes and dramatic medieval staging, not a tall woman in dark modern clothes with the kind of controlled stillness that made the air around her feel slightly formal. Harry had been in the leaky cauldron once before, at age 7, when Merlin had brought him to Diagon Alley for what he'd called an orientation visit and what Harry had understood to be reconnaissance. They'd stayed 2 hours, walked the full length of the alley, had butterbeer at Florian Fortescue's, and left before anyone looked twice. Harry had come home with 12 questions about Gringotts security architecture and a very good mental map of the alley's layout, which Merlin had confirmed was the correct takeaway. Now he walked through the leaky cauldron's back courtyard and watched the bricks fold aside and felt the alley open up ahead of him and experienced something he hadn't expected, which was the specific pleasure of returning somewhere you understood. It was busy for a Thursday morning. Witches and wizards moving with the particular purposeful energy of people who had errands, robes in every shade, owls in cages, the smells of something caramel and something smoky and something that was neither and both. A small girl with purple plaits was arguing with her mother outside Madame Malkin's. 2 old wizards were having a debate outside the apothecary that had the intensity of something they'd been at for years. Above the rooftops the sky was a clean September blue, the kind that only existed in early autumn and made the light look like it had an opinion. "Keep moving," Morgan said, without looking at him. She'd noticed him noticing. She always noticed. "I am moving. You're cataloging." "I'm moving and cataloging. It's efficient." She made the short sound. They kept moving. Gringotts rose at the end of the alley the way important buildings rose, not with aggression but with certainty, white marble and goblin architecture and the absolute assurance of somewhere that had survived everything by being exactly what it was. The bronze doors. The silver doors. The goblin at the entrance who looked at them with the flat professional assessment of someone who evaluated people for a living and found most of them manageable. The goblin looked at Morgan. Morgan looked at the goblin. Something passed between them that Harry filed under old business, not my concern yet, and they were waved through. Inside, the Great Hall of Gringotts was exactly as Harry had imagined it from Merlin's descriptions, high, vaulted, busy with the specific controlled chaos of serious money being seriously managed. Goblins behind long counters, queues of witches and wizards with their varying degrees of patience, the scratch of quills and the clink of coin, and somewhere deeper in the building the distant mechanical heartbeat of the cart system in the vaults below. Morgan went directly to the nearest free teller without waiting in any queue. The goblin behind the counter looked up with the beginning of a standard redirection and then stopped. "I require access to 3 vaults," Morgan said. "The Potter Family Trust Vault, the Potter Ancestral Vault, and the third one." She held the goblin's gaze. "You know which third one?" The goblin was quiet for a moment with the controlled expression of someone running several calculations simultaneously. Then it said, "Identification." Morgan placed one hand flat on the counter. The counter hummed, a brief vibration that Harry felt in his feet rather than heard, and the goblin looked at the result and its expression shifted into something that wasn't quite deference but was in that neighborhood. "Griphook will take you," it said. Griphook was old, even by goblin standards, His face was a map of resolved negotiations and his eyes were the particular sharp brown of something that had been looking at gold long enough to see exactly what it was worth. He led them through a side door and down a corridor that narrowed as it descended, the temperature dropping with each floor, the walls shifting from marble to raw rock, the light changing from chandelier bright to something older and more mineral. He did not make conversation. Neither did Morgan. Harry walked between them and watched the walls and felt the magic in them deepening with every step, not the worked, deliberate magic of the alley above, but old magic, the kind that lived in stone and water and the dark places where things had been accumulating for a very long time. The cart appeared at the end of the passage and Griphook stepped in with the familiarity of someone who found the experience perfectly reasonable. Harry got in after Morgan and they dropped. The vault system opened up around them as they descended, passages branching off in every direction, the carts of other customers visible as moving lights in the dark, the sound of rushing water somewhere below. The dragon was down here somewhere, Harry knew from his reading, chained in the lower depths, used to guard the high-security vaults. He could feel the edge of its presence before he could hear it, a heat and a scale of life that pushed against the small human awareness of being underground. They stopped at the first vault after 4 minutes of controlled descent. Potter Family Trust, the number was stamped on the door in bronze. Griphook applied the key in his own palm to the lock and the door swung open and Harry had his first experience of family money, which turned out to be a moderate-sized cave full of gold that represented generations of accumulated comfort. He stood in the doorway for a moment. The coins were sickles and galleons, the galleons warm yellow in the vault light, stacked with the slight disorder of real money rather than display money. There were also some documents in a sealed box, 2 or 3 small objects wrapped in velvet, and a letter propped against the nearest coin stack in an envelope that had his name on it. Harry looked at the envelope for a moment. Then he picked it up, put it in his coat pocket, and turned around. "I'll read it later," he said. "What's next?" Morgan watched him do this with the careful attention she brought to all his choices and said nothing. They went back to the cart. The second vault took 8 minutes to reach, the descent steeper now, the temperature genuinely cold. The Ancestral Vault. The Potter lineage going back to its recognized beginning, which was, for the official record, several hundred years of magical nobility in Britain. But when Griphook opened the door and they went inside, what Harry felt was considerably older than several hundred years of magical nobility. The Ancestral Vault was 3 times the size of the Trust Vault, and most of it was not gold. There were documents, hundreds of them, rolled and sealed and organized by a system that would need hours to decode. There were objects, a set of scales that balanced themselves on no visible fulcrum, a mirror whose reflection was always approximately 3 seconds behind, a cloak folded over a stand near the back that Harry recognized from his reading immediately, the invisibility cloak, one of the 3 Deathly Hallows, which he looked at and catalogued without touching because there would be time for that. And on the wall at the back of the vault, set into a mount of dark iron, was a sword. Not Excalibur. Harry knew that before he'd taken 3 steps into the vault. This sword was older than the Potters but not old enough, it had the feel of something from several centuries back, beautifully made, the hilt set with a single ruby. It radiated a specific kind of magical signature that took him a moment to identify. "Gryffindor's sword," he said. "A Gryffindor's sword," Griphook corrected, from the doorway, with the precision of a goblin. "One of 4 made by Ragnar I. The others were lost. This one passed into the Potter lineage in 1643 through a bequest from a Gryffindor descendant with no surviving heirs." Harry looked at it. The sword was undeniably impressive, the magic in it clean and bright, goblin-made silver at its core, the kind of blade that would absorb what it needed and remember it. He could feel it, slightly, a pull at the edge of his awareness. Not the pull of something claiming him. The pull of something that would serve him well if he chose it. He looked at Morgan. "A good weapon," she said. "Yours, legally, by vault right. But not the one," Harry said. "No." He looked at the invisibility cloak once more. Then at Griphook. The third vault. The third vault took another 15 minutes. Harry noticed the cart was going differently now, not simply down but sideways, at an angle that didn't correspond to any conventional geometry, the walls of the passage around them shifting from stone to something darker and more crystalline, the temperature dropping through cold and out the other side into something that was simply absence, not warm or cold, just profoundly still. The magic in the walls was not Gringotts' magic. It was older than Gringotts. Older than the building above, older than the alley, older than London itself. Harry sat in the cart and felt it pressing against his awareness and breathed through it the way Morgan had taught him to breathe through strong magical fields. Don't resist, don't absorb, stay at the center of yourself and let it move around you. He was aware of Morgan watching him do this. He was aware she was pleased with how he was doing it. The cart stopped. There was no door number here. No bronze stamp. The vault door was not iron or steel, it was stone, raw granite, and set into it were marks that Harry recognized with a start that he kept carefully internal because Griphook was watching and Griphook's job was to notice things. The marks were the same as the ones in Morgan's private workroom. Pre-Roman Britain. The oldest stratum of British magical notation, predating formal magical scholarship by centuries. I need a moment, Morgan told Griphook. The goblin stepped back without comment. Morgan placed both hands on the stone door and did something that Harry felt rather than saw, a deep pulse of magic, very quiet, very certain, the kind of working that didn't announce itself because it didn't need to. The stone recognized her. Not her current self exactly, but something underneath, the specific frequency of her magic, which had been the same for 15 centuries because the core of a person's magic was as fixed as their fingerprints, only deeper. The door opened inward without a sound. The vault beyond was small. Dark stone on all sides, no gold, no documents, no accumulated centuries of family wealth. Just a room, and in the center of the room, horizontal on a plinth of black stone, a sword. Harry stepped inside. The air changed the moment he crossed the threshold. That was the only way to describe it, a change in the air, in the quality of the space, as though the room had been waiting in a particular configuration and had just shifted into a different one. Not threatening. Not dramatic. Just a door opening that had been closed for a very long time. The sword was not what he'd expected and exactly what he'd expected. He'd read about Excalibur in 30 different sources, Morgan's accounts, Merlin's accounts, historical documents ranging from reliable to fantastical, the Arthurian mythological tradition which had gotten everything both right and completely wrong. He knew its dimensions, its history, its magical properties as documented and theorized. None of that had prepared him for the object itself. It was large, larger than the painting suggested, a weapon made for serious use rather than ceremony, the blade wide and long with a weight to it that was visible even before he touched it. The metal was not steel. It wasn't quite any material he could name, something silver bright that caught the vault's dim light and made more of it than it should have, the edge of the blade having a quality that the light treated differently than it treated the flat, as though the edge existed in a slightly different relationship with space than normal matter did. The hilt was gold. Not decorative gold, functional gold, wrapped in something dark that had once been leather and was now a material shaped by 15 centuries of waiting, the crossguard simple and strong, the pommel set with a stone that was deep red in this light and probably changed in others. Cut into the base of the blade, barely visible unless you were looking for them, were words in the old notation. Harry stopped 3 feet from the plinth and stood there. He didn't reach for it. Not yet. He looked at it and let the magic of the place move around him and found that it was already doing something, not dramatic, not violent, just a recognition, the same quality as the ley lines in Godric's Hollow but quieter, more certain, an ancient system noting a fact it had already known and confirming it. He was aware of Morgan standing in the doorway behind him. Aware of Griphook somewhere beyond that. "What does the inscription say?" he said, because he could see it was there but the angle was wrong from where he stood. "Take the sword and read it yourself," Morgan said. Harry reached out and wrapped his hand around the hilt. The vault did not explode. There was no column of light, no dramatic resonance, no choir of ancient magic rising to announce the moment. What happened was quieter and stranger than any of that. The sword simply recognized him. A warmth through the hilt into his palm, not heat exactly, more like the warmth of something that had been cold for a very long time and was remembering what it felt like to be otherwise. A pulse, once, deep and certain, that went up his arm and settled somewhere in his chest where the ley line resonance lived. And the inscription, he could read it now, and he did, the old notation flowing into meaning in his mind the way it had learned to since age 7, I remember what was given. I wait for what is owed. He stood with Excalibur in his hand for a moment, getting the weight of it. It was heavy in the way real things were heavy, not burdensome, just honest. His arm knew how to hold it, which was strange and not strange. He looked at Morgan. She was standing in the vault doorway with her hands loose at her sides and an expression that he'd never seen on her face before, complex, old, something that was grief and pride and relief all wound together in a configuration that she wasn't trying to manage. She was just letting him see it. The Pendragon line is confirmed, Griphook said, from further back, in the tone of a goblin noting a routine transaction. Vault access permanent. Gringotts acknowledges the inheritance in full. Thank you, Griphook, Harry said. He looked at the sword once more. Then he placed it carefully back on the plinth. Morgan's eyebrows moved, slightly. Not today, he said. I'll come back for it when I need it. It's waited 1500 years, it can wait a bit longer. He looked at her. And I haven't finished my training. A long pause. No, Morgan said. You haven't. They came out of Gringotts at 10:30 into the September morning, the alley busy now, the light full and honest overhead. Harry stood on the steps for a moment and felt the ordinary weight of the alley around him, real, specific, full of people living their lives with no knowledge of what had just happened 60 feet underground. Ollivanders, Morgan said. Harry nodded. He'd known that was next. He had a wand already, a practice wand Merlin had made for him at age 8, hazel and runspore fang, 12 inches, practical and good for the work they'd been doing. But a practice wand was a practice wand. Today was about the real thing. They walked down the alley. Harry kept his hands in his pockets and his eyes moving, not paranoid, just present, cataloging the way he always catalogued. Broom shop. Apothecary with its complicated smells escaping onto the street. A child his age going past with her father, the child gripping a new wand box with both hands and a huge expression of importance. A group of older students who had the look of returning Hogwarts pupils, comfortable in their robes, ownership in their stride. One of the older students looked at him. Not recognition exactly, Harry's scar was hidden by his fringe and his face was not on any poster. Just the general assessment of someone his age in a place full of people their age. Harry looked back without particular emphasis and the student looked away. Ollivanders was narrow and dim and smelled of wood shavings and something resinous and faintly electrical, the smell of concentrated wand-making that had permeated the walls over centuries. The bell above the door announced them and nobody came for a moment and then Garrick Ollivander materialized from between the shelves in the way that was apparently his signature move, those pale eyes landing on Harry immediately. Ah, he said. And then nothing else, for a moment, just looking. Harry looked back. You are not a standard appointment, Ollivander said. It wasn't a question. His eyes moved to Morgan, then back to Harry, and whatever he read in the comparison made him go very still in the specific way of someone who has just encountered something outside the range of their considerable expertise. No. No, you are certainly not. Harry said. I need a wand. Everyone who comes here needs a wand, Ollivander said, recovering himself with the dignity of someone who made instruments of great power for a living and was not going to be rattled. The question is which wand needs you. He moved back among the shelves, pulling boxes with the automatic confidence of 50 years of practice. Hold out your wand arm. Harry held out his right arm. Ollivander produced a measuring tape that measured itself with the focused energy of a tool that took its job seriously, arm length, wand hand span, the distance between various points that seemed unrelated to wands but apparently weren't. The tape finished and dropped and Ollivander produced the first wand, 11 inches, vine wood, dragon heartstring. Harry took it. Ollivander looked at him. Harry looked at the wand. Nothing. No, Ollivander said, taking it back. Here, 10 inches, holly, phoenix feather. He paused just fractionally before handing it over, something moving behind those pale eyes. Harry took the holly wand and felt it, a warmth, yes, but wrong somehow, like a key that was close to fitting but wasn't quite. It was reactive, eager, the phoenix feather pulsing against his palm with a specific recognition that was real but incomplete. Ollivander was watching him with intense focus. You feel the resonance? Yes, Harry said. But it's not right. No, Ollivander said slowly. It shouldn't be. That wand, its core came from the same phoenix as another I made 20 years ago. The other wand chose someone whose magic is the absolute inverse of yours. He took it back. They want to be matched opposites. Not partners. Harry handed it over without ceremony. Ollivander went deeper into the shelves. Harry could hear him moving, not the quick confident movements of the early attempts but something more deliberate, more searching, a wand-maker working at the edge of his pattern recognition. Morgan was standing by the door with the stillness she maintained in situations where intervention would be wrong but she was present for. Watching. Available. Ollivander came back with a box he held differently, not the casual carry of a standard option but a two-hand carry, careful. I made this 11 years ago, he said. I didn't know who it was for. I sometimes make wands before I know their person, the materials present themselves and the making begins and the wand exists and waits. He opened the box. Elder wood. Thunderbird tail feather. 13 inches, with a flexibility that isn't quite rigid and isn't quite pliant. He held it out. 12 inches. And Harry froze, not from the wand but from the wood. Elder. Elder wood is for, he started. For those who walk between worlds, Ollivander said. For those who deal in the deepest magics. For those who have a relationship with death that is not quite what ordinary mortals have. His pale eyes were on Harry with absolute focus. I don't choose the materials, Mr. Harry. The materials choose each other. Harry took the wand. The room changed. Not visibly, nothing moved, nothing exploded, the shelves stayed exactly where they were and the measuring tape stayed on the floor where it had landed. But the quality of the room changed, the way a room changes when a fire is lit in a cold space, something shifting from potential to actual. The wand in Harry's hand was not eager the way the holly wand had been, not reaching or reactive. It was simply, complete. A circuit closing. A conversation that had started 11 years ago in a ruined bedroom in Godric's Hollow finding its next sentence. He turned his wrist, slowly. The air moved. Not a spell. Just the natural consequence of the wand responding to his intent, a pulse of golden light that rolled outward from the tip and dispersed against the shelves like a wave hitting a shore, warm, bright, absolutely certain of itself. Ollivander made a sound he'd probably never made before in his professional life. Yes, he said. That would be the one. Harry looked at the wand for a moment. Elder and Thunderbird, a wood that the wizarding world associated with death mastery and a feather core from a bird that embodied storm and instinct. 13 inches. He thought about Excalibur on its plinth in the dark vault, I remember what was given, and felt the two things rhyme in some architectural way that went beyond the metaphorical. What do I owe you? He asked. Ollivander was looking at him with those pale eyes and an expression that was either wonder or terror and had probably been both at various points in his career. 7 galleons, he said, on automatic. Harry counted them out from the coins Morgan handed him. He turned to go. Harry, Ollivander said. Harry turned. The wand-maker looked at him for a moment, the elder wand, the green eyes, whatever it was he saw in the magical signature of the boy standing in his shop that had made him handle that particular box with 2 hands. Be careful, he said. Not because you're in danger. Because you're significant. And significant things attract attention. I know, Harry said. Dumbledore will want to speak with you. I know that too. He's a good man. I don't doubt it, Harry said. Good men with plans for other people are still men with plans for other people. He put the wand box under his arm. Thank you, Mr. Ollivander. The wand is exactly right. He went out into the alley. They had lunch in Diagon Alley, a small place off the main thoroughfare that Morgan had apparently known since it opened in 1887 and had opinions about. Harry ate and read the letter from the trust vault while Morgan drank something dark and reviewed the vault documents they'd brought up with them. The letter was from his father. Written in 1980, before Harry was born, sealed for the vault. James Potter's handwriting was fast and slanted in a way that suggested someone whose thoughts moved faster than his hand, and he'd made peace with the gap. If you're reading this, then things went sideways in the way I've been trying to pretend they won't, so first, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I'm not there to hand this to you in person over breakfast and make Mum roll her eyes at me for being dramatic. Second, you are loved. Full stop. Whatever happened, however it happened, you were wanted and you are loved, and I need you to have that as a fact before you have anything else. Third, and this is the practical part, your mum knows more than I do about the old magic stuff, and she's written her own letter which is in the ancestral vault. Read hers second. She'll have worked it out better than me. What I can tell you is this, the Potter name is older than it looks. We've been quiet for a long time, by choice, because quiet was safe. You don't have to be quiet. Whatever you've grown up knowing, whatever tools you have, use them. Don't let anyone talk you into small. The cloak is yours. It was my father's and his mother's before that. It'll keep you safe when you choose to use it. Key word, choose. I love you, kid. I love you so much it's embarrassing. Your mum would express this more eloquently. Dad. Harry read it twice. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his inside pocket, where it sat against his chest for the rest of the day. Morgan noticed the pocket, glanced once at his face, and said nothing. She ordered them both a second round of drinks instead and went back to the documents, which was, Harry had learned, her version of exactly the right thing. They were back in the alley mid-afternoon, the day beginning to tip toward evening, the light going golden and long. Harry was replacing his school books at Flourish and Blots. He'd been studying for Merlin and Morgan's library for 10 years and his actual Hogwarts reading list was almost entertainingly easy, but there were one or two he didn't have, and the pleasure of a bookshop was its own thing. He was in the back section, the older texts, looking at a shelf of advanced defense against the dark arts material that the school reading list didn't require, but that was interesting, when he heard voices from the next aisle over. Back to Hogwarts shopping, and she insists on being in here for an hour. Ron, honestly, Mom said we'd get ice cream. Harry filed this as background and turned back to the shelf. Then one of the voices changed pitch and content in a way that made him actually listen. That's it. That's actually Quidditch Through the Ages, the 1952 original. I didn't think there were any of those left. A girl's voice. Focused, precise, delighted in the way people were delighted when they found something genuinely unexpected. Harry had a lot of experience with that specific quality of delight. He came around the end of the shelf and almost walked into her. She was about his height, with a significant quantity of dark hair that was conducting its own separate business from the rest of her, and she was holding the 1952 Quidditch volume with both hands and reading the contents page with the focused joy of a person who had temporarily forgotten the physical world existed. Behind her was a red-haired boy with a long nose who had the expression of someone who had been in bookshops with this person before and was managing. The girl looked up. Sorry, Harry said, stepping back. I nearly walked into you. No, I moved into the aisle. She registered the near collision was mutual, then registered the book in his hand, a reflex of note-taking that was apparently automatic. Is that the Chiswick text on elemental wards? Harry looked at what he'd been holding. Yes. Are you familiar with it? I've been trying to get hold of a copy for 2 months. There's a theory in Chapter 7 about recursive word structures that I've been thinking about since I read a reference to it in, well, never mind, it's a long list. She looked at the book with an expression that was not quite hoping and not quite resigned. Is there another copy? Harry checked the shelf. There wasn't. He looked at the book in his hand and at her and made a decision with the ease of someone who had been trained to make clean decisions. Take it, he said, and held it out. She looked at him. I can't just take I have access to the chapter, Harry said. I've read it. I'm interested in your thoughts on the recursive structure theory if you work through it before September 1st. She looked at him, properly this time, the reading people look rather than the reading books look. Hermione Granger, she said, taking the book. Harry, he said. Just Harry. Harry Emery's. He'd been using it long enough that it came naturally, the Potter's name still private, still his, but not yet time. The red-haired boy appeared at her shoulder. Ron Weasley, he said. Are you first year? Yes. Same. He looked at the shelf with the resigned tolerance of someone who respected books in theory and resented them in practice. Do they really expect us to read all of these before term starts? Yes, Hermione said. I've read most of them, Harry said. The Charms text is good. The Transfiguration one has an error in Chapter 4 that'll drive you mad if you try to follow the logic. Hermione looked at him sharply. Which error? The author assumes the base transformation energy is constant across all material classes. It isn't. Living material has a variable baseline that depends on, he stopped. Sorry. I go into it. The error's on page 47. How do you know about the variable baseline? Hermione asked, and her voice had gone from polite to genuinely interested in one step, the way voices did when something unexpected had been said. Morgan's been drilling it for 2 years, Harry said, and then realized that meant nothing to her and added, my guardian. She's very thorough. Behind Hermione, Ron was doing the face of someone watching a conversation move at speed and deciding whether to catch up or wait. Your guardian is teaching you advanced transfiguration theory, Hermione said. Advanced transfiguration theory, word construction, wandless application, combat magic, old notation reading, magical history that isn't the version in Bin's textbook. He said it without arrogance, just accuracy. She has strong feelings about preparation. Hermione looked at him for a long beat. Then she held up the Chiswick text. Chapter 7, she said. The recursive word theory, you think it works or you think it's aspirational? I think it works, but the author missed the stabilization mechanism, Harry said. Which means most people who try to apply it get the structure right and the duration wrong. Yes, she said, with the slightly fierce satisfaction of someone being confirmed. Yes, that's exactly, she stopped. We've never met before. No. How do you? She was thinking through it, visibly, the problem-solving moving across her face in a way Harry found easy to read. You've had access to source materials that aren't on the standard curriculum. Yes. And a teacher who, yes. She looked at him for another moment. Something settled in her expression, a decision being made, a category being assigned, the specific look of someone who has found something that fits into a space they didn't know was empty. September 1st, she said. Hogwarts Express. Chapter 7. I'll find you, Harry said. She nodded. Then she turned to find Ron, who had drifted back to the front of the shop in the direction of the exit and the promised ice cream. Harry watched them go and felt something. A rightness. The first contact with the world he was about to enter, and it was someone who wanted to talk about ward theory in a bookshop. He found this appropriate. Outside Flourish and Blots, the late afternoon light was warm on the alley stones and Morgan was waiting on a bench across the way with the documents from the ancestral vault arranged on her knee and the expression of someone who had seen him come out and noted the Chiswick text was no longer in his hand. Gave it away, she said. Lent it philosophically, Harry said, sitting beside her. To someone who'll do more with it than I would. She looked at him. Good day. Not a question. He'd know the answer. Yes, he said. Good day. He thought about the sword on its plinth, the warmth through his palm, the inscription. He thought about his father's letter in his pocket. He thought about the elder wand in its box in his coat. He thought about Hermione Granger's expression when she'd been confirmed about the stabilization mechanism. I know what I am now, he said. Not just, theoretically. Actually. Morgan said nothing, because nothing was what the moment needed. I'm ready for Hogwarts, he said. I know, she said. You've known for 2 years. 2.5. He looked at her, the alley busy around them, the day ending in gold. Then why? Because ready to go and ready to go on your own terms are different things, she said. You weren't on your own terms yet. You are now. She folded the documents with the precision she folded everything. You held Excalibur today. Yes. And put it back. Yes. She looked at him. Arthur never did that. Arthur picked it up and never put it down until it was too late. She said it without judgment, just fact. You put it back because you knew it wasn't time. Because you had enough to carry and you knew that too. She held his gaze. That's the difference. Harry thought about this for a moment. Between Arthur and me. Between someone who carries a destiny and someone who chooses one. The alley moved around them, ordinary and alive, people buying and talking and existing in the particular golden light of a day almost done. Harry Potter, 10 years old, sitting in Diagon Alley with a wand that had been waiting for him and a sword he'd put back on its plinth and a letter from his dead father over his heart, looked at the woman who had raised him and felt the full, specific weight of everything she'd given him, not as a burden but as a foundation. Thank you, he said. Just that. Morgan Le Fay looked at him for a moment with that expression that was grief and pride and relief all at once and then looked away, back at the alley. Don't thank me yet, she said. Hogwarts hasn't started. Harry smiled. I know. I'm looking forward to it. Merlin said you would be. Merlin says a lot of things. He's usually right. Don't tell him that. I never do, she said, and stood, and they walked back down the alley together toward the leaky cauldron and the road home, the day folding closed around them like a book between readings. Chapter 4, The Sorting of Harry Emery's The Hogwarts Express left at 11. Harry was on the platform at 10:40, which was early enough to find a good compartment and late enough not to stand around. He had one trunk, packed with the practical efficiency Morgan had drilled into him, everything in its right place, nothing unnecessary, and a barn owl he'd acquired 3 days ago from a shop in Hogsmeade that Morgan had taken him to via a route that bypassed Diagon Alley entirely. The owl was large and white and had immediately established that it was going to do things on its own terms, which Harry respected. He'd named her Iris. Platform 9 3/4 was exactly as chaotic as he'd expected, families clustered in the steam from the engine, owls and cats and one extremely stressed toad, first years identifiable by the combination of new trunks and expressions ranging from excitement to barely managed terror. Harry moved through it noting details the way he always noted details, filing things that would be useful and releasing things that wouldn't. He found Hermione Granger at the barrier end of the platform before he found a compartment, which was not the plan but was fine. She was with a woman who was clearly her mother, the same dark hair, the same precise attention, though on her mother it was directed at organizing luggage and on Hermione it was directed at Harry the moment she saw him. You're early, she said. So are you. I wanted to make sure I got a seat. There are 273 first years this year according to the letter, and if everyone arrives at once the compartments will be, she stopped. Did you read chapter 7? You've had the book for 3 days. I read quickly. She pulled it from her bag, which she was already carrying despite having a trunk. Of course she was already carrying it. The stabilization mechanism, you said the author missed it. I think I found what it should be but I want to check against your reasoning. Recursive temporal anchor, Harry said. You need to tie the ward's duration to a fixed event rather than a time measurement, because time measurements erode with the ward's own entropy. Hermione stared at him. That's exactly, how did you? I spent 2 days on that. My guardian spent 2 weeks on it when she first read the text in, he stopped. A while ago. She was annoyed about it. When did the text come out? 1960. Something like that, Harry said, which was technically true if you accepted a fairly flexible definition of something. Hermione's mother was watching this exchange with an expression that mixed amusement and slight concern in equal measure. I'm Jean Granger, she said. You must be Harry. Harry Emrys. It's good to meet you. Hermione's mentioned you. Mum, just the once, Jean Granger said, with the serenity of a parent who knew exactly what she was doing. She said she'd met someone who'd given her a book and understood the stabilization mechanism. It was a significant first impression, Harry said. Hermione decided this conversation had run its natural course. Compartment, she said, and picked up her end of the trunk with both hands. Ron Weasley found them 20 minutes after the train pulled out of the station. He appeared in the compartment doorway looking slightly harassed, which turned out to be a familial condition. 3 older brothers had apparently been taking enthusiastic advantage of a captive audience since King's Cross, and he had escaped to the first-year section of the train with the urgency of a survivor. Mind if he saw Harry and pointed at him. Bookshop. Elemental Ward's bloke. That's me, Harry confirmed. Ron dropped into the seat opposite with the relief of someone who had found a demilitarized zone. My brothers, he said, by way of complete explanation. How many? Harry asked. 5. 2 at Hogwarts, 3 older. Bill and Charlie have left. Percy's head boy, or going to be, he's already talking about it like it's happened. He stopped. Sorry. You probably don't know any of them. Not yet, Harry said. I'll know Percy in about 6 hours. Ron laughed, surprised into it. Yeah, you will. He looked between Harry and Hermione, who had the Chiswick text open again. Are you two going to talk about books the whole way? No, Harry said. Tell me about Hogwarts. Ron looked immediately more comfortable on solid ground. He knew Hogwarts the way Harry knew the hall, from the inside, from family memory, from years of stories that had become part of the furniture of who he was. He talked about it the way people talked about somewhere they loved without needing to say they loved it, just through the quality of the detail, the specific pride in particular features. The Great Hall's actually great, he said. I know it sounds obvious, but the ceiling's bewitched to look like the sky outside. First time you see it you feel like there's no roof. Bewitched by Morgan Le, Harry stopped. Ron looked at him. Morgan Le Fay, yeah. Hogwarts, a history has a whole bit about it. She apparently designed the concealment wards on the building too. He paused. She's sort of terrifying in all the historical accounts. All the magic she did. Merlin's there too, obviously, but Morgan's the one who apparently actually ran the defensive architecture. Harry kept his face entirely neutral. Sounds like she was efficient. That's one word, Ron said. Hermione had looked up from the book. The accounts are mostly biased, she said, with the certainty of someone who had read all of them and formed a position. Medieval sources on female magic practitioners are notoriously, she stopped, seemed to remember she was on a train rather than in a library. Sorry. History thing. No, go on, Harry said. She looked at him with the assessment that was starting to feel like her default toward him, checking whether he meant it. He did. She went on. She was, Harry noticed, extraordinarily good at synthesis, at taking a large field of information and finding the structural bones of it quickly. She'd read more than most adults he'd met and she processed it all at speed, but the valuable thing wasn't the volume, it was that she knew what to do with it. She connected things. She asked the right second question. He liked her immediately and practically and without ceremony, the way you liked someone who was genuinely useful to think alongside. By the time the lunch trolley came around, a fourth person had joined them, a girl named Neville Longbottom, who appeared in the doorway looking for a seat and who Ron had apparently met on the platform. Neville was round-faced and earnest and had a toad in his pocket that he introduced as Trevor with the slight embarrassment of someone who knew a toad was an unusual choice but was committed to it. Harry shook Neville's hand and Neville looked slightly surprised to have it shaken, like the gesture was more formal than he expected from someone his age. He relaxed after a minute and started talking about herbology with a specific contained passion that was very different from his general manner. He went quiet and definite about it, the way people went quiet and definite about the things they actually knew. Harry noted this with interest. The fifth addition to the compartment was less welcome and more informative. He appeared around an hour from Hogsmeade, flanked by two very large people who were apparently decorative. He had pale pointed features and the particular kind of confidence that came from never having had it challenged rather than from earning it, which Harry could identify at distance because he'd been trained by people who had the other kind. "I heard there was a compartment of first years who don't know anyone," he said, from the doorway. His eyes moved across the group and did the social sorting that was apparently instinctive to him: Ron's worn robes, Hermione's muggle-cut clothes, Neville's general appearance, and Harry last. He stopped at Harry. "You're Harry Emrys." "Yes," Harry said. "Draco Malfoy." He said the name with a specific weight, the way you said a name that was supposed to land. Harry waited for the rest. When nothing landed the way it was supposed to, Draco recalibrated with the small eye shift of someone who'd expected a different response. "The Malfoy family has been at Hogwarts since 1640, Harry said, pleasantly. "Your family vault at Gringotts has the lineage documents going back to the founding period. The original family name was de Malfoy, the Anglicization happened in the early 18th century." He paused. "You have an ancestor named Cassius de Malfoy who was apparently an extraordinarily talented potions master. The records on him are interesting." Draco stared at him. The two large flanking people looked at each other. "How do you know about the vault documents?" Draco said, slowly. "I was at Gringotts recently," Harry said. "I had access to the lineage archives. Your family has a genuinely significant history, the actual history, not just the social performance of it." He held the other boy's gaze. "You should read the Cassius de Malfoy records if you haven't. He was working on potion and ward combination theory 300 years before it became academically fashionable." Another recalibration. Draco was fast, Harry gave him that. He'd walked in with a social script and it had been thoroughly derailed and he was adapting rather than freezing. "Which house are you expecting?" Draco asked, finding a different angle. "I don't expect things," Harry said. "I find out." Draco looked at him for a moment longer, then at the rest of the compartment: Ron, who had gone carefully blank, Hermione who was watching with sharp interest, Neville who had found something important to study about his knees. He made a small sound that wasn't quite dismissal and wasn't quite acknowledgement. "Malfoy," said the taller of his two companions, looking at the windows. "Hogsmeade." Draco looked. The mountains were visible, the light outside going purple-gray. He looked back at Harry once more, then turned and left. Ron exhaled. "Draco Malfoy," he said. "His whole family were Death Eaters. You know whose lot? Dad's mentioned them." He paused. "You read the Gringotts lineage archives?" It was a thorough visit, Harry said. Hogsmeade Station in the dark was cold and moving, torchlight on the platform and Hagrid's voice carrying above everything else: "Furs years this way," and Harry found himself looking at Rubeus Hagrid with a specific private knowledge that nobody else on the platform shared. Hagrid had come to Godric's Hollow. Had stood in an empty lane with no explanation for what had happened and gone to tell Dumbledore. Had carried that mystery for 10 years. Harry looked at him and thought, "You tried to help me. You went to that house for me." He filed this as something that mattered. The boats across the lake in the dark were exactly as good as Ron had suggested they'd be. The castle rising out of the black water, lit from within, towers and battlements, and the particular satisfying immensity of some were built by people who understood that buildings carry intent. Harry looked at it and felt the ancient ward architecture responding to his presence from across the water. Not dramatically. Just a recognition. The same systems that recognized Morgan and Merlin, recognizing the frequency of the lineage they'd built this place to protect. The castle knew him. He kept his face calm and watched the towers grow above them and said nothing. Professor McGonagall met them in the entrance hall with the controlled authority of someone who had been doing this for 30 years and found it neither tedious nor sentimental, just a job she took seriously. She explained the sorting, answered questions briskly, and left them in a side chamber to wait while the older students filed into the great hall. Harry stood in the chamber and felt his classmates' nerves like weather, Neville white-knuckled about his toad, Ron cycling through increasingly catastrophic sorting theories under his breath, Hermione running through information about the 4 houses with the focused calm of someone who had prepared for this and was now deploying the preparation. A ghost came through the wall. Several people recoiled. The ghost, Fat Friar, Hufflepuff, Harry identified, beamed at them. Then the doors opened. The great hall was exactly what it was, enormous and lit by thousands of floating candles and full of faces all turned toward the door, every table packed with students in their house colors. Harry walked in with the other first years and felt the weight of it, the specific gravity of somewhere that had been doing this same thing for centuries, and rather than being awed by it he felt, interested. Present. The ceiling showed cloud-streaked sky, enchanted, the stars beginning to appear through the gaps, and Harry looked at it and thought about Morgan in the 7th century climbing scaffolding in this very hall with chalk and determination to get the warding runes for the concealment system exactly right. The sorting hat was old and patched and extraordinarily alive with accumulated consciousness. It sang, and Harry listened to the song as a genuine transmission of information rather than ceremony. The hat had been observing Hogwarts students for 1,000 years. Whatever it said, even in verse, was worth attending to. The sorting began. Hermione went to Gryffindor, the hat barely touched her head. Neville Longbottom took longer, the hat sitting for a full minute before calling Gryffindor, and Neville walked to the table with the dazed expression of someone who'd been told something important that he hadn't fully processed yet. Harry watched each student go up with the attention he brought to everything and built his picture of the houses in real time, not from description but from the students themselves, how they walked to the stool, how they sat, how they received the sorting, how the tables received them back. Emery's, Harry. He walked up. The hall was doing the whisper thing, his name, Emery's, do you know an Emery's, who's that, and Harry sat on the stool and let the hat drop over his eyes and the great hall disappeared. The hat's presence in his mind was ancient and oddly warm, a consciousness designed to know people quickly, to read the deep structure of who someone was rather than who they presented. Well, the hat said, inside his head, and it sounded genuinely startled. I haven't seen one of these in a while. I'd imagine not, Harry thought back. Pendragon blood. Camelot trained. 15 centuries of accumulated knowledge from 2 of the most powerful practitioners who ever, the hat paused. You've been raised by Merlin and Morgan Le Fay. Yes. Does Dumbledore know you're here? He's about to. The hat made a sound that might have been laughter. Fair enough. It paused in the way of something thinking genuinely, not performing thought. You could go anywhere, you know. Anywhere at all. Slytherin would take you immediately, the cunning is real, the self-possession, the willingness to play a long game. Ravenclaw for the mind, and what a mind, the integration of information you do is remarkable. Hufflepuff, oddly, has a case, the loyalty runs deep in you, deeper than it shows. And Gryffindor? Harry thought. Gryffindor, the hat said, and its tone changed, not to reverence exactly, but to something specific. The courage isn't the interesting thing about you. Most people's courage is about overcoming fear. Yours is different. You were raised to see clearly, so you were never taught to fear what shouldn't be feared. Your courage is just accuracy. A pause. You know which house the Pendragon line has always sorted to? I do, Harry said. But you said I could go anywhere. You could. Then I'll tell you where I want to go. He thought it clearly, without hedging. Put me where I'll be most useful. Not comfortable. Useful. The hat was quiet for a long moment. Gryffindor. It called. The Gryffindor table erupted. Harry took off the hat and handed it back to McGonagall, who was looking at him with an expression he couldn't immediately decode, something between assessment and recognition, as though she'd seen something in those few seconds that she was filing away carefully. He walked to the Gryffindor table and sat down next to Hermione, who had saved him a seat with the practical foresight of someone who'd already identified her first Hogwarts decision. Well, she said. Gryffindor, he said. Obviously. Ron sat down on his other side about 3 students later, equally Gryffindor, equally unsurprised. Knew it, he said, and reached for the food that had just appeared on the table, because for Ron Weasley the sorting was complete and the important business of dinner had begun. Harry looked down the table, then up at the staff table. Dumbledore was already looking at him. Not the general benevolent survey of a headmaster over his students. Specific, focused attention, the kind that came from 10 years of looking for something and having it suddenly appear. Albus Dumbledore was an old man with extraordinary eyes, blue, piercing, the kind of eyes that had seen enough to make most things legible, and those eyes were on Harry with an expression that mixed relief and calculation in something that might have been genuine shock in carefully managed proportions. Harry met the headmaster's gaze directly. He didn't look away and he didn't perform anything, no deference, no challenge, just a steady, even look that communicated clearly, I see you looking. I'm looking back. Dumbledore blinked, slowly, once. Harry looked away and picked up his fork and tried the roast beef, which was excellent. The week moved fast. Classes were not challenging in the way Harry had prepared for, they were challenging in a different way, the challenge of learning to work within a structured institution after 10 years of entirely personal instruction. The magic itself was not difficult. Moving at the class's pace was an exercise in patience he hadn't anticipated needing. Charms. Professor Flitwick was small and delighted and genuinely knew his subject, which Harry respected immediately. He made the Wingardium Leviosa feather rise on the first incantation, held it steady while 3/4 of the class were still getting the wrist motion, and set it down again when Flitwick came around so as not to attract comment. Not because he was hiding, because there was no point in establishing a dynamic in the first class that would make every subsequent class about demonstrating rather than learning. Transfiguration. McGonagall turned her desk into a pig and back and then explained the theory in the precise, structured way of someone who understood the subject architecturally. Harry listened carefully and caught 3 places where her explanation was an elegant simplification of a more complicated truth, not wrong, just the pedagogical version. He filed the gaps for later. When the class attempted to turn a match into a needle, Harry produced a needle in about 30 seconds and spent the rest of the class working on making the needle more needle-like in a very specific technical sense, the grain of the metal, the precision of the eye, which was not on the curriculum and was not what McGonagall had asked for but was more interesting. McGonagall picked up his needle at the end of class and looked at it for longer than she looked at anyone else's. Emery's, she said. Professor. Where did you study before Hogwarts? Privately, he said. My guardian is very thorough. She looked at him over her glasses with the expression of someone who suspected they were being told the truth in a technically accurate but substantially incomplete way. Who is your guardian? Her name is Morgan, he said. She prefers not to be formally listed with the ministry. He held McGonagall's gaze steadily. She's well known to the school, historically. McGonagall was very still for a moment. Something moved behind her eyes, a connection being made, a conclusion arrived at that she was not ready to say out loud in a classroom. Her jaw was very controlled. Stay after class tomorrow, she said. Of course, Harry said, and went to find Hermione, who had also produced an excellent needle and was examining it critically. History of Magic was Binns, who was a ghost and taught accordingly, a monotone drifting through dates and goblin rebellions with the enthusiasm of someone who had been dead long enough to forget what enthusiasm felt like. Harry sat in the back and wrote detailed notes that had no relationship to what Binns was saying. He was writing the actual history, the version he knew from Merlin's first-hand accounts, the places where the official record had been sanitized or simplified or just got it wrong. Hermione looked over his shoulder midway through and her eyebrows went up. "This isn't what he's saying." "No," Harry said. "It's what actually happened." "How do you know?" "My guardian's historical sources are very primary," he said. She stared at him for a moment, then looked at Binns, then back at Harry's notes. Then she pulled out a second parchment and said, quietly, "Tell me the Goblin Rebellion of 1612. Binns has been on it for 20 minutes and I have the impression he's left out the interesting part." Harry told her the interesting part, quietly, while Binns droned on, and watched her write quickly and see it become real as she wrote it, the way good students made information real by engaging with it. Defense Against the Dark Arts was Quirrell, which was the class Harry had been most interested in and least told himself he was most interested in. He'd known about Quirrell's condition since age 7, Morgan had identified it when she'd first catalogued the Hogwarts staff in preparation for Harry's arrival. Professor Quirinus Quirrell, Muggle Studies professor turned data teacher, returned from a year abroad in Albania with a stammer he hadn't had before and a purple turban he apparently wore for reasons related to a gift from an African prince. Harry had read the Albanian story and filed it as interesting in the way transparent things were interesting. He sat in the front row of Defense Against the Dark Arts and watched Professor Quirrell deliver a lesson on defending against common hexes and felt, underneath the stammer and the overpowering garlic smell and the general aura of a man performing nervousness, something that his training had specifically taught him to recognize. Corrupted magic. A second presence layered under the primary one. Old, dark, and very, very compressed, a consciousness without a body, clinging to the only available architecture with the desperation of something that understood its situation with terrible clarity. Voldemort. Compressed into a wraith. Living on the back of Quirrell's head. Harry sat in the front row and listened to the lesson about hexes and felt the dark presence the way you felt a fire from across a room, directional, specific, aware. And he felt it notice him in return, the way a fire noticed when someone opened a window. A flutter of attention, dark and sharp, that moved across the classroom like a finger tracing a name. He didn't react. He kept his notes. He asked one question about the counterhex for a stinging jinx that was slightly beyond the curriculum and watched Quirrell's stammer get worse as the presence underneath him redirected focus. After class, in the corridor, Hermione said, "Professor Quirrell seems very anxious." "Yes," Harry said. "I read he had a bad experience with vampires in Romania. Or Albania. The sources differ." "The sources differ," Harry agreed. Ron caught up with them. "Quirrell's rubbish," he said, simply. "Fred says he was fine as Muggle Studies. Dad reckons the year abroad broke something." "Something broke," Harry said, which was true and also complete, and then changed the subject. The common room that evening was warm and red and full of the comfortable noise of a house settling into itself. Harry sat in a chair by the fire with a book open on his knee and his mind doing several things simultaneously, processing the day's classes, categorizing information, holding the awareness of Quirrell's situation in a separate file labeled "Handle carefully, handle soon." Percy Weasley had already introduced himself with the self-importance of someone who considered himself a resource. The twins, Fred and George, had appeared briefly, assessed Harry with the quick bright intelligence of people who deployed humor as serious strategy, and gone away satisfied by whatever they'd concluded. Several other Gryffindors had come and gone. Neville sat near Harry at the fire, working through his herbology textbook with the quiet satisfaction of someone doing something they were good at in a subject most people undervalued. Harry watched him for a moment and then said, "The Devil's Snare entry." Neville looked up. "Sorry. Page 83. The standard avoidance advice is wrong." Neville checked page 83. "It says stay still." "It says stay still, which works if you have an external light source." Without one you need to relax completely, genuine relaxation, not stillness, because Devil's Snare responds to heat signatures before it responds to movement. You can stay perfectly still and still be a heat source. Harry turned a page. Morgan's notes on it are different from the textbook version. Neville looked at him. How does your guardian know about Devil's Snare specifically? She knows about everything specifically, Harry said. She finds ignorance inefficient. Neville was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then, carefully, she sounds terrifying. She is, Harry said. She's also one of the best people I know. He glanced up. Herbology's your thing. It wasn't a question, and Neville received it as the statement of fact it was, someone who had noticed, and noted, and said so without making it a big moment. Something shifted in Neville's posture, very slightly. The particular adjustment of someone who was used to their competencies being overlooked and wasn't sure what to do when they weren't. Yeah, he said. It is. Good, Harry said. I know warding theory and combat magic and very old history. I know almost nothing about herbology. That seems like an inefficiency. He looked at his book. We should probably fix it. Neville looked at him for a moment. Then he flipped to the Devil's Snare page and held the book out. The heat signature thing, what's the mechanism? Harry told him, and Neville listened with the quality of attention he gave herbology and asked 3 good questions in a row, and the fire burned warm in the common room while outside the castle the Scottish mountains went dark and cold and the stars came out over a ceiling that Morgan Le Fay had enchanted in the 7th century, still working perfectly. The attempted management started on Friday. Harry had been expecting it in some form, had known since the first night in the Great Hall that Dumbledore's attention would translate into some kind of approach. What he hadn't anticipated was the middleman. Professor Quirrell stopped him after defense against the dark arts. Emery's, Quirrell said, and the stammer was thinner now, which was itself informative. The headmaster would like a word. At your convenience. Harry looked at Quirrell for a moment. Looked, specifically, at the turban. The dark presence underneath it was paying close attention with the focused intensity of something that had been waiting for this moment and was now running calculations. Of course, Harry said pleasantly. I'll go now if the headmaster's free. He said it to Quirrell, but he knew he wasn't really talking to Quirrell. He held Quirrell's eyes for one additional second, just one, just long enough, and let the awareness show. Not threatening. Not dramatic. Just a clear, calm signal, I know you're there. We will have a conversation about this, but not today and not like this. Quirrell went very still. Harry smiled at him, the polite smile, and went to find the headmaster's office. The stone gargoyle and the moving staircase were exactly as described. Dumbledore's office was full of silver instruments and portraits of previous headmasters and the general atmosphere of somewhere a very clever person had been thinking for a very long time. The sorting hat on its shelf, an ancient sword in a glass case, Gryffindor's sword, the display piece, not the one in the Potter vault, and behind the desk, Albus Dumbledore. In person, Dumbledore was more than his reputation and also less, in the way all legendary things were when you encountered them in a room. He was old and tall and his eyes were exactly as described, that specific shade of blue, that depth of attention. He was looking at Harry the way a man looked at a problem he'd been working on for a decade that had just walked into his office wearing a grey shirt and wire-rimmed glasses. Harry, Dumbledore said, and then corrected himself. Forgive me, Mr. Emery's. Harry's fine, Harry said, and sat down in the offered chair without waiting to be asked to sit. You've been looking for me. A pause, barely perceptible. I have been concerned about you, Dumbledore said, with the gentle precision of someone choosing words deliberately. When Hagrid went to collect you from Godric's Hollow in 1981, you weren't there. I have spent 10 years not knowing whether you were safe. I was safe, Harry said. I can see that. Dumbledore's eyes moved across him, the Elder Wand, visible at his pocket edge, registered but not yet named. The quality of his stillness, registered and filed. You are remarkably composed for an 11-year-old who has just started school. I had good teachers. Who? Harry held the headmaster's gaze steadily. People who love me and prepared me well. I would very much like to meet them. I know, Harry said. They know. The timing is theirs to choose. He let that land, then continued before Dumbledore could move to the next angle. I know about the prophecy. I know about Voldemort's state and what's happened to his soul. I know about the Philosopher's Stone and why it's in this building. He watched Dumbledore's face do very subtle things. I know you have a plan that requires a version of me that doesn't exist. And I know that you built that plan from good intentions, because you're a genuinely good person who has been fighting a very long war and learned to think in terms of necessary variables. The office was quiet. One of the silver instruments made a small sound, like a cleared throat. I am not going to be a variable, Harry said, and his voice was entirely pleasant. I'm going to be a student. I'm going to learn what Hogwarts has to teach me, and I'm going to address the Voldemort situation when the time is right, and I'm going to do it in a way that doesn't require anyone to die unnecessarily. He paused. Including me. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. The kind of look that was not just seeing but reading, the deep assessment of one of the most perceptive magical minds of the century working at full capacity on a problem that didn't fit its expected parameters. You said you know about the Philosopher's Stone, he said, finally. And why it's here. Nicholas Flamel. You moved it from Gringotts in the summer, Vault 713, which a third party attempted to access on the same day a large Gringotts withdrawal was made, which I understand was your distraction mechanism. He tilted his head. The third party was Quirrell. The presence directing him was Voldemort. He will attempt to access the stone. Not immediately, he's learning what's in this building first. A beat. Including me. Dumbledore's fingers had steepled in front of his face. And when he attempts to access the stone, he said carefully, what do you propose to do? I propose to handle it, Harry said. Not because it's my destiny and not because you've arranged it. Because it needs handling and I'm the most capable person in this building for the specific task. He held the old man's gaze. You built the protections well, Professor. Genuinely well. But they were built for a version of this situation where I wasn't here. I am here. That changes the geometry. Another long silence. Dumbledore was doing something with his expression that was very controlled and very interesting, processing, adjusting, the visible architecture of a mind reorganizing itself around new information. I find, Dumbledore said slowly, that I am simultaneously relieved and entirely uncertain what to do with you. That's honest, Harry said. I appreciate it. Who taught you to be this? Dumbledore searched, direct. The people who raised me consider indirectness a form of disrespect, Harry said. I agree with them. He stood up, because the conversation had reached its natural end. I'll be in Gryffindor Tower if you need me. I'm happy to talk whenever you want, about anything. I'm not your enemy, Professor. I'm not anyone's enemy who doesn't make themselves mine first. He met those blue eyes, steady as anything. But I'm also not anyone's piece to move. He walked to the door. Harry, Dumbledore said. Harry turned. The old man was looking at him with an expression that had settled into something that was, not defeat, not capitulation, but something more like genuine recognition. The look of someone who had just seen something that made a great deal of sense even if it complicated everything. The Elderwood wand, Dumbledore said. 13 inches. Harry waited. Take care of it, Dumbledore said quietly. And take care of yourself. Always, Harry said, and went back down the moving staircase into the castle, which hummed around him with the ancient recognition of somewhere that had known who he was before he walked through the door. Chapter 5, What Lives in the Dark November arrived like an argument. The Scottish mountains turned grey and serious and the lake went the color of old iron and the wind found every gap in Hogwarts' ancient stonework with the persistence of something that had been trying since the 7th century and hadn't given up. The older students moved through the corridors with the resigned competence of people who knew the castle's cold moods. The first years learned quickly that wool socks were not optional and that the staircases moved more often when it was raining, for reasons that nobody had ever satisfactorily explained. Harry didn't mind the cold. He'd grown up in a building that existed between weathers and had trained on cliff tops at dawn in November since he was 7. The cold was just information. What he minded, slightly, was the pace. Not of learning. Hogwarts was teaching him things, genuinely. Flitwick's charms theory was clean and well-structured, and McGonagall's transfiguration had a rigor to it he appreciated, and even Snape's potions, which was adversarial in a way Harry found mildly interesting, gave him a new way to think about precision and sequence and the patience required for work that punished rushing. What he minded was the rhythm of institution, the bells, the schedules, the enforced compartmentalization of knowledge into 45-minute segments, when his mind had spent 10 years running continuous and lateral and free. He'd adapted. He was good at adapting. But some mornings he woke before the castle did and sat by the tower window and felt the absence of the hall like a missing note in a familiar chord. Iris helped. The barn owl had appointed herself as anchor to everything outside the castle walls. She came and went through the Ollery with a white-feathered authority that the other birds apparently found convincing, and the letters she carried between Harry and the hall were the thread that kept the two worlds of him connected. Morgan's letters were short, information-dense, and occasionally contained single-sentence observations that took him 3 days to fully unpack. Merlin's were longer, more discursive, full of marginalia and cross-references and the occasional drawing that was either a diagram or a doodle and was sometimes both. Harry wrote back every week without fail, detailed accounts of what he was learning and thinking and observing, because he'd been raised in a household where information was shared and that habit ran deeper than Hogwarts walls. He wrote about Quirrell in his 3rd week, carefully, in the old notation that he and Merlin had used for sensitive subjects since he was 8. The situation is confirmed and active. The object of interest is here and he's found it. I'm monitoring. Merlin's response came 2 days later. Be careful. Not because you can't handle it, you can. Because Riddle has been alive and calculating for 50 years and has no reason to underestimate himself and every reason to underestimate you. Use the first. Let him keep the second for now. Morgan's came separately, the same day. Don't engage until you understand his complete state. You know what you know. Find out what you don't. Harry had folded both letters into his book on magical theory and spent the week finding out what he didn't know. What he learned about Quirrell in November was this: the man was in genuine agony. Not the dramatic agony of someone performing suffering, but the quiet continuous agony of someone being slowly consumed. Quirrell the person, timid, earnest, a decent teacher buried under the wreckage of his current situation, was still in there, somewhere behind the stammer and the garlic and the thing living at the back of his skull. Harry caught evidence of him in unguarded moments, the way Quirrell's face changed when a student finally understood something difficult, a genuine flash of the teacher underneath, the way his hands shook not from nerves but from the effort of maintaining any kind of self against a consciousness that wanted the whole space. He didn't share this observation with anyone except Iris, and Iris was not a conversationalist. He shared it, on a cold Tuesday afternoon in early November, with Hermione, because Hermione had come to him with a question that made keeping it to himself no longer productive. They were in the library, their default location for any conversation requiring sustained thought, a habit established in the first week when they discovered they both worked better with books around than without. Neville was with them, doing herbology homework, which he'd taken to doing in their company because it turned out that Harry's questions about plants were the specific kind that required actually knowing the subject to answer, and Neville had decided this was the best possible use of his expertise. Ron was at the Quidditch pitch because Ron had discovered in his 3rd week that Harry was an extraordinary flyer and had immediately appointed himself Harry's Quidditch career manager, which Harry found both amusing and touching and had accepted on the condition that Ron's own flying improved, which it had, rapidly, because Ron had good instincts and had only needed someone to tell him so with genuine authority. Hermione put her quill down and said, quietly, "Something's wrong with Quirrell." Harry looked up from his book. "I know that sounds obvious, because he's clearly anxious all the time and the stammer and everything. But it's not that. She was watching him with the careful attention she deployed when she'd reached a conclusion she wasn't certain of and wanted to test it against someone she trusted. When I went back to ask him about the second-year curriculum last week, he was different. When I walked in, his back was to me and he was just standing there, and the room felt, she stopped. Wrong. Like cold in a room that should be warm. And when he turned around, it took a second for his face to settle. Harry held her gaze. "What's in the third-floor corridor?" she said. "Hermione, I'm not asking Dumbledore, and I'm not asking McGonagall, because if it's something Dumbledore doesn't want found, asking him just tells him I've found it." She tilted her head. "So I'm asking you, because you know things you haven't told me yet, and I've been patient about it because you have good judgment and good reasons. But this is relevant." Neville had gone quiet over his herbology, which meant he was listening. Harry closed his book. He looked at both of them, Hermione with her precise certainty, Neville with his careful attention, two people who had in 3 months become something he hadn't expected so soon and wasn't going to pretend otherwise. "Quirrell isn't just anxious," Harry said. "He's possessed. There's a second consciousness living in him, sharing his body, using his access to this building." He said it the same way he said most things, which was to say plainly, and watched them receive it. The consciousness is Voldemort. What's left of him after his body was destroyed in 1981. He survived because of things he did to himself before his death that I won't go into tonight, but the relevant point is that he's alive, diminished, and looking for a way to restore himself. The library made its library sounds around them. Madame Pants moving somewhere in the stacks. The fire in the reading room crackling. "The Philosopher's Stone," Hermione said. "Not surprised. Working through it. The stone creates the elixir of life. If Voldemort could, yes. And it's in the third-floor corridor. Behind a series of protections that were put there specifically to stop exactly this." "But Quirrell already knows where it is," Neville said, quietly. Both of them looked at him. He was looking at his herbology notes, but his shoulders had the particular set of someone who'd made a decision. "He's going to try to get through the protections." "Yes," Harry said. "But not yet. He's still learning what's in his way." He looked at them both. "I've been watching him. Monitoring the progress." Hermione was quiet for a moment. "You've known since the start of term." "I confirmed it in the first week. I've been working out the full shape of it since." "Why didn't you?" She stopped herself. "You were making sure you had it right." "I was making sure I had it right," Harry agreed. "And I was trying to work out whether Dumbledore's arrangement of the protections is sufficient or whether it needs augmenting." "Is it sufficient?" Harry thought about this honestly. The protections were good. Dumbledore, Sprout, Flitwick, McGonagall, Quirrell himself, the last one being the dark irony of the arrangement, and one more that he'd identified and not yet fully mapped. A mirror, somewhere in the depths of the corridor. He'd felt it from above, a strange, specific magical presence that was less a protection and more a trap of a different kind, something that worked by understanding human desire rather than by force. "The mechanical protections are excellent," he said. "The last one," he paused. "The last one is the cleverest and also the most specific to the person facing it. I need to see it directly before I can assess it fully." "When?" Hermione asked. "Soon," he said. "The timeline is moving. He stopped, because the right word was hungrier and it sounded dramatic. He's becoming more focused. The proximity to the stone is making him less patient." Neville carefully rolled up his herbology parchment. "What do we do?" "You and Hermione do nothing yet," Harry said. "You keep your eyes open and you tell me anything that seems relevant and you trust my judgment on the timing." He held Neville's gaze, then Hermione's. "I'm not trying to manage you. I'm trying to make sure that when something happens, it happens at a time and in a way that I've prepared for rather than been pushed into." Hermione looked at him with the expression she got when she disagreed with something but respected the reasoning. "And if the timing gets taken out of your hands? Then we move immediately," Harry said. "But I'd rather choose the ground." The ground shifted in December. Harry felt it first in Quirrell's classes, a change in the quality of the presence underneath him, something that had been circling growing more linear, the attention shifting from surveillance to planning. Where before Voldemort had been reading the building, cataloging the protections, moving laterally through available information, now he was running sequences. Testing. The way you tested a lock before you picked it. Harry sent a letter to Morgan the day he felt the shift. Iris took it at midnight from the astronomy tower, white wings loud in the cold dark, gone in 4 seconds. Morgan's reply came the next morning during breakfast, which was fast even for Iris, which meant Morgan had been waiting for this particular letter. "Go down there and look at the mirror. Do it tonight. Tell me what you see." That was the whole letter. Harry read it twice, then ate his eggs. The third-floor corridor at midnight was cold and wrong in the way places were wrong when they'd been sealed and watched for months, a specific staleness, the air holding the memory of intentions without any of the ordinary through traffic of daily use. Harry had the invisibility cloak from the family vault, retrieved last week when he decided the timeline required it. It didn't make him magically undetectable, anyone with the right spells could find him, but it removed the casual visual notice that would have made the whole thing significantly more complicated. He moved through the corridor without light, because he didn't need it. Darkness was just information about wavelengths, and he'd been trained to navigate without visible light since he was 9, pressure and temperature and the specific texture of spatial magic guiding him better than a torch would have. The door at the end. The dog, 3 heads, enormous, currently asleep. He'd known about the dog. He moved past it with the careful respect you gave large dangerous things that were currently not paying attention to you, went through the trapdoor, and descended into the series of chambers. Each protection was exactly as he'd worked out from above, the devil's snare, he went limp and relaxed and dropped through in about 4 seconds, the flying keys, he picked the right one by the distinctive chip in the wing, didn't bother with the brooms, the chess set. He walked around it on the right side where the pieces couldn't track to follow without breaking formation, a gap in the logic of their programming, the troll, unconscious already, Dumbledore's provision, which suggested the headmaster expected this route to be used by someone who wasn't supposed to be here and had chosen unconscious troll over active troll as the slightly more humane option, Snape's potions puzzle, a logic problem, 2 minutes, done. Then the last chamber. The mirror was tall, ceiling height, ornate, the frame scrolled with more detail than you could read in one viewing. It stood in the center of the room casting its own peculiar light, the surface showing something that was never quite reflections, always slightly different, slightly ahead or behind the moment. Eris stra eru oit ube kafru oit on wosi, the inscription around the frame, backwards, which parsed to I show not your face but your heart's desire. Harry stood in front of it. He stood very still and looked at what it showed him and breathed through it the way Morgan had taught him to breathe through strong emotional magic. Don't resist, don't absorb, stay at the center of yourself and let it move around you. The mirror showed him standing in a place he recognized, the hall, the fire going, morning light through the high windows. Merlin was there, Morgan was there, both of them at the table with books open and tea getting cold, the ordinary specific furniture of his childhood. And standing slightly apart from the ordinary scene was something that made his chest tighten in the way it did when he looked at the photographs in the album, a man with dark hair and glasses and an expression he recognized from the mirror, and a woman with red hair and green eyes that were his eyes, both of them looking at him from the mirror's surface with an expression that had no name in any of the 15 languages he'd been taught but that meant we see you, we're proud of you, we're here. He stood with it for a long moment. Then he looked again, with different eyes, the trained analytical layer that ran underneath everything, that Morgan had built into him since he was small. He looked at the mirror's mechanism, the magical architecture of it, the way the desire function worked as both lure and lock. And he found it. There, in the deepest layer of the mirror's enchantment, a secondary function, beneath the desire mirror, a hiding place of extraordinary cleverness. The stone was in the mirror. Not reflected, not displayed. Held. Someone who looked into the mirror and wanted to use the stone would see themselves using it, the desire function showing them the goal rather than the tool. But someone who looked into it and wanted only to find it, no use, no purpose beyond finding, would receive the stone itself. He looked at his reflection and said, quietly, clearly, in his own mind, I want to find the stone to keep it safe. That's all. The mirror showed him for a moment with a heavy red stone in his hand, and then it showed him without one, and the stone was in his pocket. He looked down at it. A small rough red stone, warm, the elixir of life condensed into something that fit in a closed fist. He stood in the chamber with the philosopher's stone in his hand and thought about what to do with it, which he'd actually thought through in advance because going in without a plan was something Morgan would never let him do and the habit was thorough. He put the stone back in the mirror. Not because he couldn't keep it safe, he absolutely could. But because removing the stone from the mirror removed the trap from the trap. If Voldemort came and found the chamber empty, he'd know the architecture had been circumvented and he'd escalate in ways that would be harder to manage. If the stone stayed in the mirror, the trap stayed intact. He left it where it was, memorized the complete mechanism of the mirror's secondary function, and went back up through the protections the way he'd come. He wrote to Morgan about the mirror at 3 in the morning from the astronomy tower, the castle dark below him, the cold absolute and clean. Her reply came at breakfast. Good. Now you know everything. Wait for him to move. Merlin added, at the bottom in different ink, well done. Also go to bed at a reasonable hour. Harry folded the letter and looked at his eggs and felt the particular state that came after confirmation. Not satisfaction exactly, more like the moment when a map becomes complete, every edge known, every route charted. Ron dropped into the seat across from him with the displacement energy of someone who had Quidditch practice information and was physically incapable of not sharing it. Wood wants to run the Wronski feint drill again, he said. I told him you could do it in your sleep. I can, Harry said. That's what I said. Ron loaded his plate with unhurried thoroughness. You're miles better than Oliver at the actual flying, you know. He just won't admit it because he's the captain and captains don't admit things like that. Oliver Wood is an excellent Quidditch captain, Harry said, which was true. Wood's tactical thinking was genuinely good, he read the game architecturally, understood momentum, anticipated opponents. He was a better strategist than he was a keeper, which was already saying something. What's the Wronski feint drill problem? He wants it at speed but he won't adjust the recovery distance, so everyone's pulling up too late and it's making the team nervous about. Ron caught himself. You actually want to hear about the drill mechanics? I always want to hear about the drill mechanics. Ron beamed, the specific beam of someone whose enthusiasms were taken seriously, and started explaining the drill mechanics in detail, and Harry listened with genuine attention and made 2 suggestions that Ron immediately recognized as correct. And by the time McGonagall started the post-breakfast announcement, Harry had already solved the Wronski feint problem and was thinking about something Hermione had said the week before about the ward architecture under the Quidditch pitch. The timeline moved in late December. Harry was in the library on the last day before the Christmas break, most of the school having left, the castle gone quiet and large around the remaining students. He was working through an advanced text on soul magic that he'd borrowed from Dumbledore's personal library. The headmaster had, after their first conversation, adopted a policy of making his library available to Harry with the pragmatic acceptance of someone who had recognized that the information would be found regardless and providing it directly was simply more efficient. He felt it in the evening. Not dramatically, not an alarm, not a vision. Just the specific change in the castle's background magic that he'd been monitoring for 2 months. A door opened somewhere that had been closed. A presence moved through levels it wasn't authorized to move through. The Quirrell Voldemort composite was in the 3rd floor corridor. Harry put the book down, picked up the Elder Wand from the desk where it had been lying, and went. He went in faster than his original descent, he knew the route, knew the exact parameters of each protection, moved through them like water finding channels it had already mapped. Devil's Snare in 3 seconds. Keys in 1. Chess set, around the right side, 20 seconds. Troll unconscious. Potions, 15 seconds. The mirror chamber. Quirrell was standing in front of the mirror with his back to the door, his posture rigid with a specific quality of forced concentration. The Voldemort presence was dominant now, at the surface, pushing everything else down. The stammer was gone. The posture was different, straighter, colder, the inhabited quality of the man barely visible underneath. Harry walked into the chamber and said, clearly, "Professor Quirrell." Quirrell turned. What looked at Harry from Quirrell's face was not Quirrell. It wore Quirrell's features, but the expression was entirely wrong, ancient and calculating and cold in a way that was personal rather than general, the cold of someone who had decided a long time ago that warmth was a weakness and had been vindicated by everything that followed. "Harry Potter," it said, through Quirrell's voice, and the stammer was completely gone. "I go by Harry Emery's these days," Harry said pleasantly, stopping about 10 feet from the mirror. He kept his wand loose in his hand. "Not raised. Not put away. Though I suppose you knew me as Potter." "I knew you as an infant," Voldemort said. "In a crib in Godric's Hollow." Quirrell's face arranged itself into something that was not quite a smile. "You've changed considerably. 11 years will do that." "Who has been teaching you?" "People who love me," Harry said, which was the true answer and also the one that would tell Voldemort least. Something moved in Quirrell's eyes, the calculation running quickly. "You knew I was here. Since the first week of term. And you've been watching." "I've been learning," Harry said. "Watching is part of learning." Quirrell's head tilted, Voldemort's gesture, not Quirrell's. "You're not afraid of me." "No. You should be." "Why?" Harry asked, and it was a genuine question, asked with genuine curiosity. "You're diminished. You're sharing a body you're slowly destroying. You've been alive for over 50 years and spent the last 10 as a wraith because you made yourself so fragile that a mother's love shattered you." He paused. "I was raised by people who were alive when Britain was Rome's northern problem. Fear requires an appropriate object." Quirrell's face went very still. "Then, the stone is in the mirror." "Yes." "You know the mechanism." "Yes." Voldemort looked at him through Quirrell's eyes and Harry could feel the ancient dark intelligence working, cataloging, assessing, running probabilities. It was faster than most minds Harry had encountered. More lateral than most. The intelligence was real. That was the unsettling part. This wasn't stupidity or even ordinary ambition. This was a brilliant mind that had chosen the worst possible framework for all of that brilliance. "Stand aside," Voldemort said. And then, with a different texture, "I have no quarrel with you tonight. I came for the stone, not for you." "I know," Harry said. "You don't want to waste energy on me. You want the stone, the body, the return. I'm a complication." He held the cold gaze steadily. "But you're going to hurt Quirrell getting to it. You're going to use him up and discard what's left of him, and he doesn't deserve that. He was a decent person before you found him." Something moved in Quirrell's face that was actually Quirrell, a flicker, a recognition, the man underneath hearing himself named as a person rather than a vehicle. It lasted about 2 seconds before it was suppressed. "Sentimentality," Voldemort said. "Accuracy," Harry said. "It's different." He raised his wand, slowly and without drama, and pointed it at the mirror rather than at Quirrell. "You can't get the stone. I know how the mirror works. To receive the stone you need to be looking for it without intent to use it. Anyone who wants it for power sees only themselves using it. You want power. You'll never see anything but your own goal reflected. Then I'll take it from you," Voldemort said. "You know the mechanism. You can retrieve it." "I did retrieve it," Harry said. "Last week. And I put it back." He watched Quirrell's face process this. "I know every protection in this building and I can move through all of them in under 5 minutes. If I wanted the stone out of here I would have taken it weeks ago. A pause. "You're protecting it," Voldemort said slowly. Something in his tone had shifted, the contempt thinning slightly, replaced by something more careful. "Not for Dumbledore." "You're not, this isn't Dumbledore's play." "No," Harry said. "It's mine." "Why?" "Because you need to be stopped," Harry said, simply. "Not destroyed, not yet, that's more complicated, I know about the Horcruxes, but stopped tonight, in this room, so that Quirrell doesn't die and the stone stays safe and you go back to whatever diminished existence you've been managing until I've finished working out the complete solution." He tilted his head. "This isn't the final conversation between us. We both know that. This is just me telling you that the path through me is not a path." Voldemort looked at him for a long moment. The cold intelligence working. The calculation visible, if you knew what calculations looked like when someone was running them against insufficient data. "You are 11 years old," Voldemort said. "Yes," Harry agreed. "And I've been trained by two of the most powerful magical practitioners in the last 15 centuries, I'm carrying an Elder Wand that chose me, and I know more about your vulnerabilities than you do about mine." He said it without arrogance, just as a layout of relevant facts. "I'm asking you to leave tonight. Take Quirrell. Let him live. Come back in a different form when you've rebuilt enough to make a proper attempt. And you won't stop me. I'll stop you getting the stone tonight." Beyond that, Harry looked at Quirrell's face, the man underneath pressing against the surface. "I'm not here to kill you, Voldemort. I'm here to keep the stone safe and keep Quirrell alive." He held the cold gaze. "Those are the terms." The chamber was very quiet. The mirror cast its strange light across the stone floor. And then Voldemort did something Harry hadn't planned for. He took direct control of Quirrell's hands, raised them, and sent a curse at Harry that was not a standard curse, not Avada Kedavra, something else, older, something he'd developed in his long study of dark magic that Harry didn't recognize by sight. Harry moved. Not a shield, a redirect, two-layered cast, the attack caught and folded sideways in a working that sent it into the stone wall 6 feet to his right. The wall cracked. Harry was already moving when Voldemort sent the second curse, dropping below it, coming up on Quirrell's left side, and doing something that Morgan had taught him at age 9 that had no formal name, a specific deep working that targeted the junction between two magical presences sharing a single body. Not an attack on Quirrell. An attack on the connection. The effect was immediate and violent. Quirrell's body arched backward, a soundless scream, both presences reacting simultaneously, Quirrell in pain, Voldemort in something worse than pain, the architectural shock of a connection that had been structural suddenly stressed in a way it hadn't been designed to withstand. Harry felt it cost him too. The working was not free, it pulled on something deeper than wand magic, the old magic at his core, Lily's sacrificial protection still woven into the lineage magic he carried. His hands were burning. He looked down and found them emitting faint gold light, which was unexpected but not alarming. He pressed the advantage. He directed that same targeting working at the connection again, harder, and this time something tore. Not violently, not the way a wound tore, but cleanly, like a document ripped along its fold, and Voldemort's presence came loose from Quirrell with a sound that was not quite sound, a frequency rather, that registered in Harry's chest rather than his ears. The dark presence expanded into the chamber air, formless, furious, and for one moment Harry felt it full on, the raw weight of Voldemort without the buffer of a host body, the cold intelligence and the ancient hatred, and underneath those, much further underneath, something small and frightened that had been buried so long it had stopped knowing it was there. He held his ground. The presence hit him and the gold light from his hands brightened, and the lily magic in his lineage did what it had been doing since 1981, it reflected. Not the way a shield reflected. The way a truth reflected a lie, which was to say completely, without violence, simply by being incompatible with it. The dark presence rebounded. It passed through the stone wall and was gone. The chamber went quiet. Quirrell collapsed. Harry caught him, wandlessly, a cushioning working, lowering the man to the stone floor with the careful urgency of someone managing a medical situation. Quirrell's face was his own again, the Voldemort quality completely absent, the stammer likely to return when he was conscious but the cold ancient intelligence entirely gone. Harry crouched beside him and checked what he could check: breathing, present, pulse erratic but present, no immediately life-threatening physical damage. The damage was deeper, in the magical core, where months of hosting a parasitic consciousness had taken a toll that would need careful attention. He stood up. Looked at the mirror. The stone was still there. He looked at his hands. The gold light had faded. The burning had gone with it. He sent a Patronus to Dumbledore, his first full Patronus, which he'd been practicing since October, which emerged as a stag and which he noted and filed as something to think about later, carrying the message chamber below 3rd floor: Quirrell is down, stone is safe, Voldemort's presence expelled, come now. Then he sat down on the floor next to Quirrell and waited, because there was nothing else to do and the man shouldn't be alone. Dumbledore arrived in 4 minutes, which was fast. McGonagall was behind him, wand out, robes slightly askew in the way that suggested she'd been moving quickly without taking time to prepare for being seen moving quickly. Behind both of them, to Harry's surprise, was Severus Snape, who took one look at the chamber, the cracked wall, the unconscious Quirrell, Harry sitting on the floor, and went carefully, completely neutral in the way of someone who had expected one configuration and found another. Dumbledore looked at Harry. Then at Quirrell. Then at the mirror. The stone, he said. Still there, Harry said. Intact. He didn't get to it. Dumbledore stopped. He was doing the reading the room thing that powerful people did, processing residue, taking in the damage pattern in the wall, the quality of the stone floor where the workings had discharged. You separated them. Yes. It was cleaner than I expected. The Patronus was a stag, Dumbledore said, quietly. Yes, Harry said. I've been meaning to think about that. McGonagall made a sound that was either distress or amazement or both. Snape was looking at Harry with an expression that was new, not the cold professional hostility he deployed in potions, not the performative disdain. Something stripped of performance, a real look, sharp and specific and directed at Harry with full attention. Harry met it directly and held it, and Snape looked away first, which told Harry something he filed carefully. Is Quirrell? McGonagall started. Alive, Harry said. He needs Madame Pomfrey and then probably specialist treatment for parasitic magical contamination, which is not a Hogwarts infirmary specialty. He looked at Dumbledore. There's someone who can treat it properly. I'll write to her. Her, Dumbledore said, and something moved in those blue eyes, a connection made, a conclusion arrived at that was large and significant and was going to require a great deal of sitting with before it was resolved. I'll write tonight, Harry said. He stood up. Brushed the stone dust from his trousers. Looked at the mirror once more, at the stone visible to his awareness in its depths, sitting in its impossible hiding place. The stone needs a better home, he said. The mirror is clever, but it's been found now. The protections need rebuilding around a different architecture. He looked at Dumbledore. I have some thoughts on the ward structure, if you want them. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment, the Elder Wand, the Stag Patronus, the cracked wall, the unconscious Quirrell, the gold light residue on the stone floor, and the expression on his face was the most complicated expression Harry had seen on any human being who was not Merlin or Morgan. Mr. Emery's, Dumbledore said carefully. Harry. Harry. He paused. I think it's time I met your guardians. Harry looked at him steadily. I think so too, he said. I'll let them know. He picked up his wand from where he'd set it on the floor, walked past Snape, past McGonagall, and went back up through the protections toward the surface. The castle received him, its ancient wards humming, the corridors quiet and dark and cold in the way of somewhere that had been watching everything from the beginning and would be watching long after everyone in the room below had become history. He had a letter to write. Chapter 6, The board appended Dumbledore came to the hospital wing at 7 in the morning. Harry was already awake. He'd been awake since 5, which was when he'd finished his 3rd letter and sent Iris out into the December dark with all 3, one each for Merlin and Morgan separately and one addressed to Nicholas Flamel that Morgan had told him years ago to send if the stone situation ever resolved itself. Iris had taken all 3 with the weighted authority of an owl who understood she was carrying something that mattered. The hospital wing was quiet at that hour, Madame Pomfrey moving between Quirrell's bed and her supply cabinet with the focused efficiency of someone who had identified a problem and was dismantling it methodically. Quirrell was unconscious, color slowly returning to his face, the parasitic magical contamination being drawn out layer by a sequence of purification charms that Pomfrey had developed herself over 40 years of dealing with Hogwarts' considerable range of magical injuries. Harry sat in a chair by the window and watched the December sky go from black to dark blue to something that might eventually become grey, and read the Flamel book he'd found in Dumbledore's library 2 months ago. Dumbledore arrived and sat in the chair on the other side of the window without preamble, which Harry respected. The headmaster had a cup of tea in each hand, which was a specific gesture Harry noted and filed as either thoughtful or calculating and decided was probably both. Harry took the tea. "You sent letters last night," Dumbledore said. 3. 1 to your guardians. 2 to my guardians, Harry said. They correspond separately. They have different communication styles. And the 3rd? Harry held the headmaster's gaze. Nicholas Flamel. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Outside the window the dark blue was becoming grey, the first thin line of winter light on the hills. "You're going to recommend he destroy the stone." "I'm going to give him the full picture and let him decide," Harry said. "It's his stone. His work. His life." He drank some tea. "He's 665 years old. He has the complete information set to make the decision himself, he doesn't need me deciding for him. And if he chooses to keep it, then we talk about better security," Harry said. "Real security, not a corridor full of clever puzzles." He kept his voice neutral. "Voldemort will come back. You know he will. Not in this form, I expelled this fragment but the other Horcruxes hold his soul together. His return will be more substantial and more prepared than last night. The stone is a target for all of it." He paused. "But it's Flamel's choice." Dumbledore looked out the window. He had the expression of someone wrestling with the discomfort of being in a room with a person who had correctly identified the answer you'd been working toward for 6 months and arrived there by a completely different route. "You know about the Horcruxes," he said. "Yes. All of them. I know there are 6 plus the one in my scar. I know the theory of where they are based on Voldemort's history and psychology." Harry looked at him. "I don't know the exact locations of all of them yet. That requires more work." "That is work I have been doing," Dumbledore said carefully, "for 20 years. "I know," Harry said. "I'm not suggesting your work is wasted. I'm suggesting we might be more efficient about it together than separately." He set down the tea. "I was told you had a plan that required a specific version of me. A version shaped by 10 years in Surrey and 1 summer of rapid information delivery and a willingness to be deployed as a weapon at the right moment." He held the old man's gaze. "I'm not that version. But I'm not your enemy either. What I'm offering is a partnership, real information, honestly shared, 2 people who want the same outcome working toward it without one managing the other." Dumbledore was very still. "I know that's not what you built your plan around," Harry said. "I know it complicates 20 years of careful architecture. I'm sorry for that genuinely, you built from good intentions with real intelligence and the architecture is mostly sound." He paused. "But I've been raised to think that honesty is more useful than comfort, and the honest thing is that your plan needed a Harry Potter who didn't know what he was. I do know. And knowing changes everything." The hospital wing was quiet except for Pomfrey's movements and Quirrell's slow breathing. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long time with those blue eyes that had seen everything that the 20th century had managed to produce and had processed it all without breaking. What was in them now was not defeat. It wasn't capitulation. It was something closer to the expression of someone who had been walking toward a specific door for a very long time and had just discovered the door was larger than the map suggested. "You mentioned," Dumbledore said slowly, "that your guardians would be visiting." "They'll be here this morning," Harry said. "The wards will let them through." "The wards are calibrated to, I know what the wards are calibrated to," Harry said. "They'll come through regardless. The foundational warding architecture of this building is compatible with them in ways that override the surface-level protections." He met Dumbledore's eyes. "They helped build it." Dumbledore went very, very still. "They arrived at 9:30. Harry felt them before he heard them, a change in the castle's background frequency, the deep structural wards shifting into a different configuration the way a room shifted when someone walked in who had every right to be there and the room knew it. Not a warning. A welcome. Ancient recognition, the building settling into an older version of itself. He was in the entrance hall, dressed and wand in pocket, when the main doors opened. Morgan came first. She always came first into situations she hadn't fully scoped, not from recklessness but from the precise opposite, the tactical preference for being the first variable in an unknown equation. She was in dark clothes with the particular controlled presence that she carried like a second skin, her eyes moving across the entrance hall and its enchantments and its centuries of accumulated magical residue with the expression of someone reading a room they'd helped design. Merlin was behind her, looking at the ceiling with the expression of someone who had strong feelings about what renovations had been done to his original specification and was deciding whether to say anything. He was wearing the coat again, the tweed Enron one, and carrying 2 cups of tea that Harry was almost certain he'd made somewhere inside the building already by means that didn't bear examining. Harry walked across the entrance hall and Morgan's eyes found him immediately with the specific attention she brought to him and only him, a full read in approximately 2 seconds that assessed his state from the previous night, found him intact, and moved on to the space around him. "You look tired," she said. "I'm fine." "Those are not exclusive states," she said, and looked at him for another second with the expression that was grief and pride and relief. The one he'd finally understood at age 9 was how people looked when they loved someone and had been afraid for them. Merlin handed him a cup of tea. Harry took it because it was always the right move. "The letter was thorough," Merlin said. "Good detail on the working you used to separate them. The 2-layer targeting, you used the lily magic as the second layer?" "Instinctively," Harry said. "It activated on contact with the dark presence. I didn't plan it." "You didn't need to plan it," Morgan said. "It's yours. It responds to what you need." She looked around the entrance hall once more, up at the stairs, at the portraits watching them with various expressions ranging from shock to outright alarm. "Where is Dumbledore?" "Coming," Harry said, and then, because he could feel the headmaster's approach through the castle's awareness, the familiar weight of someone who'd spent 60 years becoming part of the building, now. Dumbledore came down the main staircase with the measured pace of someone who had decided to control what he could control, which was his own presentation. He was in full Hogwarts robes, the midnight blue with stars, which Harry had never seen on him before and which seemed like a decision, not ceremonial exactly, but deliberate, the clothes of someone meeting something significant and choosing to meet it with their full formality deployed. He reached the bottom of the stairs and stopped. He looked at Merlin. Then at Morgan. Whatever Albus Dumbledore had been expecting, whatever construction he'd built in his mind over the days between Harry's Patronus message and this morning, the reality of standing in the entrance hall of the school he'd run for 30 years looking at the 2 people he was currently looking at clearly exceeded it. His face did something very controlled, and underneath the control something that was genuine shock went through and settled. "Merlin Emery's," he said, to Merlin. His voice was entirely steady. "And Morgan Le Fay." "Albus," Merlin said, with the ease of someone greeting an acquaintance of some standing. "You've done remarkable things with this building. There are 17 rooms in the East Wing that shouldn't exist structurally," Morgan said, not unkindly. "Yes," Merlin agreed. "That's the remarkable part." Dumbledore looked at them for a moment. Then at Harry. Then back at them. "You took him," he said. From Godric's Hollow. That night. Yes, Morgan said. I searched for him for 10 years. Intermittently, Morgan said, which was simply an accurate correction. Dumbledore received this. Why didn't you? He stopped himself. Started differently. He was to be protected. Lily's blood ward, her sister would have made him small, Morgan said, and her voice was not unkind but it was absolutely clear. Petunia Dursley is a frightened person who hated everything that Lily was. A child raised in that fear becomes a person shaped by it. She held Dumbledore's gaze with the absolute directness of someone who had been having this argument internally for 10 years and was now having it externally for the first time. The blood ward was sound theory. The house was a bad choice. I needed him, Dumbledore started. Unknown, Harry said, from beside Morgan, and both adults looked at him. You needed me to arrive at Hogwarts unknown. Humble. Unformed enough to be shaped by the weight of the name. He kept his voice even. I know. I worked it out from the prophecy and the plan's architecture and what Hermione told me about Bin's history of the First Wizarding War. He looked at Dumbledore directly. It was a good plan for the version of events you were managing. But managing people requires them not to know they're being managed. I know. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Something in the old man was working through something, not just processing this conversation but something larger, some restructuring. My office, he said, finally. All of you. Dumbledore's office with 4 people in it was cramped in the way that important conversations were cramped, too much in the space, the furniture slightly too close, the portraits of previous headmasters leaning forward in their frames with unabashed attention. The sorting hat had gone very still on its shelf. The silver instruments had stopped their usual faint sounds. Harry sat. Morgan stood by the window. Merlin had found a second chair from somewhere that hadn't been there before he arrived and was sitting in it with his tea. Dumbledore sat behind his desk and looked at all 3 of them and said, Tell me everything. Everything is quite a lot, Merlin said. Could you narrow it down? The boy's lineage. What you've trained him to do. What you know about Voldemort's remaining soul anchors. And why, he looked at Harry, you believe you can end this without following the path the prophecy indicates. The prophecy doesn't indicate a path, Harry said. It indicates an outcome. Neither can live while the other survives, that's a state that has to be resolved, it doesn't specify how. He leaned forward slightly. Voldemort interpreted it as requiring my death. You interpreted it as requiring my survival long enough to be deployed. Neither of those interpretations is the prophecy itself. The prophecy is just, a true statement about a state that currently exists. He held Dumbledore's eyes. I intend to change the state. Not by dying. By actually finishing the work. The Horcruxes, Dumbledore said. 6 of them, plus the fragment in my scar, which Morgan has a removal method for. Harry looked at Morgan, who nodded once. The 6, the diary was 1, and I have a strong suspicion about where it currently is. The ring belonged to his grandfather's family. The locket was Slytherin's. The cup was Hufflepuff's. There's a diadem somewhere in this school. The office went quiet. He hid one here, Dumbledore said. He asked for the defense position twice. He had reason to visit the building. He had a particular relationship with Hogwarts as the place that first told him he was significant. Harry looked at the ceiling. There's a room in the 7th floor corridor that doesn't always exist, a room of requirement. I've been in it twice. It's full of centuries of hidden objects. Something in there belongs to him. Dumbledore's hands had come together on the desk in the steepled configuration. And the 7th. The snake, Harry said. His familiar. Nagini. She's not a snake in the conventional sense anymore, she's been modified, bound to his soul architecture. Killing her will require something specifically magical rather than physical. He paused. I have thoughts on that, but it's further down the list. Merlin set down his tea. Albus, he said, and his tone shifted, not the casual ease of the entrance hall but something older, more weighted. The voice of someone who had known enough kings to know what tone moved them. You built this plan over 20 years with the best information you had. It was genuinely brilliant work. The understanding of the Horcruxes, the protections, the positioning of assets, none of that is wasted. He held the headmaster's gaze. But you were building around a gap. The boy-shaped variable at the center of it all was always the unknowable part. You managed the unknowable by trying to shape it from the outside, limit his information, control his context, ensure the shape of the variable matched the requirements of the plan. Dumbledore said nothing. What you have instead, Merlin said, is a boy who knows the full shape of the problem. Who has been trained by two people with a combined experience of roughly 15 centuries of magical conflict, political navigation, and direct engagement with exactly this quality of darkness. He paused. He handled last night. You saw the chamber. You know what he used and what it cost him, and you know that 11-year-olds, even extraordinary ones, don't do that on improvisation. Another pause. Work with what you have. What you have is better than what you planned for. Dumbledore looked at Merlin for a long moment. Then at Morgan, who had been watching this whole exchange from the window with the stillness of someone who had decided that Merlin's particular register was the right one for this moment and was letting him use it. The Pendragon line, Dumbledore said quietly. I'd always assumed it had ended at Camelot. Most things that people assume ended have simply changed form, Morgan said. Dumbledore looked at Harry. At the Elder Wand, visible at his pocket. At the lightning scar half visible under the dark fringe. At the quality of him, the stillness, the directness, the absolute lack of the performance of either humility or arrogance that made him oddly difficult to read against the expected templates. What do you need from me? Dumbledore said. It was, Harry thought, one of the hardest things a person like Dumbledore could say. Not surrender, it wasn't surrender. It was the specific surrender of a strategy in favor of a better one, which required enough intelligence to recognize the better strategy and enough ego control to make the swap. It was the hardest kind of practical wisdom. Access, Harry said. To your research on the Horcruxes, everything. Your personal library, your notes, your theories. I'll cross-reference against what I know and what Merlin and Morgan know, and we'll build a complete map. He held the old man's gaze. And honesty. With me, always. Not the managed version where I'm told what's good for me to know. All of it, as it develops. And in return, I'll keep you informed of everything I intend to do before I do it, Harry said. I'll work within this institution rather than around it. I'll sit in Flitwick's Charms class and McGonagall's Transfiguration and Snape's Potions, and I'll do the reading and the work, and I'll be present here, in the way that being present here requires. He paused. And when the time comes to end it, the real end, all 7 Horcruxes and Voldemort himself, I'll let you be part of it. He tilted his head. Not because I need permission. Because you've earned the right to see it finished. Dumbledore was quiet for a long time. The silver instruments resumed their faint sounds, slowly, one by one. There is one more thing, Dumbledore said. The prophecy's final shape, the power the Dark Lord knows not. You believe you understand what that power is? Yes, Harry said. Tell me. Harry looked at Merlin. Then at Morgan. Then at Dumbledore. Love is the common description, he said. The academic interpretation, sacrificial magic, the mother's protection, the power Voldemort consistently underestimates because he cannot understand it. He paused. That's correct but incomplete. The power he doesn't know isn't love as an emotion. It's love as a structural force, the way it changes what's possible. Voldemort made himself functionally incapable of love when he divided his soul. He literally cannot access a category of magical potential that requires an intact soul to work with. He looked at the headmaster steadily. He didn't know my mother's sacrifice would reflect the killing curse because he didn't understand the mechanics. He doesn't know about the Pendragon lineage or the Camelot working or the lily magic still active in my core. He doesn't know about the Elder Wand's choice. He let each one land. Every tool I have, he doesn't know about. Because the way I was raised, the relationships I have, the choices that produced all of it, none of those are things he can model. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Because to model them you would need to have lived them. Yes, Harry said. And he didn't. The four of them sat in Dumbledore's office for 2 more hours, working. Not planning in the grand strategic sense, not yet, that was a longer process. Working, the immediate and practical kind. Harry laid out his Horcrux map in detail. Merlin cross-referenced against his own tracking of Voldemort's movements since the 1940s, filling in historical context that Dumbledore's research had missed. Morgan sat beside Harry and drew out the scar working on parchment, the mechanism of the fragment's containment, the removal procedure, the sequence she'd spent 9 years developing. Dumbledore read it and asked 4 questions that were all good ones, and Morgan answered them with the compact precision of someone who had earned the authority to be precise. By 11 o'clock, when Pomfrey appeared in the doorway to say that Quirrell was conscious and asking to speak with the headmaster, they had a working framework. 7 targets. A sequence. A timeline that was realistic rather than optimistic. Quirrell, Dumbledore said, to Harry. He needs proper treatment, Harry said. Madame Pomfrey is excellent but parasitic soul contamination is a specialty. He looked at Morgan. I'll see him this afternoon, Morgan said. The contamination is reversible. He'll need time, but he'll recover. She paused. He's going to want to know whether he'll face legal consequences. He was possessed, Harry said. Whatever he did, Voldemort was in the driving seat. He looked at Dumbledore. He deserves the benefit of that doubt. Dumbledore nodded, slowly. I agree. Merlin stood up. He had the expression of someone who had been sitting in a chair for 2 hours and found it less comfortable than the stone sitting at the hall but was accepting it as a necessary cost. We'll come back, he said. Regularly. Not to attend classes, a slight note of amusement, but to work. Monthly at minimum, more frequently as the timeline advances. He looked at Dumbledore. You have questions. Not the ones you asked today, those were the immediate ones. There are others, older ones, about the building and the wards and the history you've been working in without knowing its full shape. He held the headmaster's gaze. Ask them. I'll answer. Dumbledore looked at Merlin with an expression that was, underneath all the layers of professional control and deliberate composure, simply wonder. You built the original ward architecture. Morgan built most of it, Merlin said. I supervised. She's better at spatial wards and I've accepted this. He said it with the ease of someone who had spent 15 centuries reaching this conclusion. The 17th room in the East Wing was mine. Don't tell her. From the window, Morgan's expression flickered. She'd absolutely known for approximately 900 years. She said nothing. Harry stood and looked at all 3 of them, the 2 who had raised him, ancient and specific and full of history he was still learning, and the old man behind the desk who had spent 20 years building a plan around a boy-shaped absence and was now meeting the boy. He felt the room around him, the castle, the deep foundational wards resonating with the frequency they'd been resonating at since he'd walked through the door in September. He felt Hermione in the library 4 floors down, probably already back at the Chiswick text. He felt Ron at the Quidditch pitch, almost certainly talking to Iris who had stopped there on the way back and was apparently interested in Quidditch or interested in Ron, the distinction unclear. He felt Neville in the greenhouse, which was where Neville went when he needed to think, and felt the specific settled quality of someone doing the thing they were supposed to do. He felt Hogwarts around him. The corridors and the moving staircases and the great hall with Morgan's enchanted ceiling and the library with its centuries of accumulated argument and the dungeons where Snape was doing something that registered as highly focused on the building's awareness. The room of requirement on the 7th floor, its contents hidden, one object in particular waiting. A great deal of work still to do. I should go to class, Harry said. All three adults looked at him. Transfiguration, he said. McGonagall's been waiting to have a proper conversation with me since the second week of term and she's been very patient about it. I'd like to not make her wait through lunch as well. He picked up the Elder Wand and pocketed it. The Horcrux map, I'll write it out in full tonight and have it to you tomorrow, Professor. He looked at Dumbledore. And the diary. I have a strong feeling it's going to make itself relevant in the next year. We should talk about that soon. Dumbledore held his gaze. Your strong feelings have an impressive track record. I was raised well, Harry said. He crossed to Morgan and she looked at him and he held her gaze for a moment. Something passed between them that didn't need words, had never needed words, was the product of 10 years of shared mornings and difficult trainings and letters carried by a white owl and the evening in the courtyard when she told him what it felt like to be defined by someone else's narrative. She put one hand briefly on his shoulder. Pressed once. Released. Harry looked at Merlin, who raised his tea in a minimal salute. Go to class, Merlin said. Harry went. McGonagall's Transfiguration class was halfway through when he arrived, which he apologized for with genuine brevity and sat down next to Hermione, who had saved his seat with the reliability of a habit established in September. She slid his notes to him without looking up from her own work. He read the first line, she'd taken notes for him, catching him up on the morning's lesson, and felt something warm settle in his chest that was uncomplicated and specific. The lesson was on the principles of human transfiguration, theoretical only at this stage, McGonagall explaining the fundamental differences between animate and inanimate transformation with the clean rigor of someone who understood the subject completely. Harry listened with full attention and found 3 places where his existing knowledge extended the theory and said nothing, because extending the theory was not today's task. Today's task was to be present and learn the foundation. Hermione passed him a folded note partway through. He opened it. Quirrell. He wrote back, alive. Recovering. No longer a problem. He thought for a second, then added, tell you properly at lunch. He passed it back. Felt her read it. Felt the particular still quality of someone who had been worried and was now reassured and was deciding how to receive the relief without making it visible in class. He looked back at McGonagall, who was drawing a diagram on the board with the crisp movements of someone who had done this 10,000 times and found it precisely as important as the first time. She was a remarkable teacher. He'd known it from the first class, but it had become more specific over the term, the precision of her, the refusal to oversimplify, the way she treated her students as people who were capable of the real version of the subject if they were given it properly. After class, as the students filed out, she said, Emery's. A moment. Harry hung back. Hermione gave him a look, he gave her back the look that meant I'll explain later, and she went, and then it was just Harry and McGonagall in the Transfiguration classroom with the November light through the high windows. She looked at him for a moment with the expression she'd had since his first week, the one that kept not quite resolving into full legibility. I understand your guardians visited this morning, she said. Yes. And that they met with the headmaster. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. Her jaw did the controlled thing. Emery's, she said, and her voice was different from the classroom voice, less professional, more direct. I've been teaching for a long time. Long enough to have some, very strong intuitions about the magic in this building and how it responds to people. She held his gaze. It responded to you differently on the first night. I noticed. I know you noticed, Harry said. Your guardian, she said. Morgan. She stopped. I asked the headmaster this morning whether my suspicion was correct. What did he say? He said he thought it probable. She looked at him for another moment. Is she well? Harry looked at his head of house, at the precise composure and the genuine care underneath it and the specific quality of someone who had spent their life in service to this building and loved it in the way you love things you'd given your working self to. "She's well," he said. She asked about the ceiling in the Great Hall. McGonagall's eyes went slightly bright. She controlled it immediately. "It still works exactly as designed," she said, with the dignified pride of someone passing on a compliment of some significance. "I'll tell her," Harry said. He picked up his bag and went to lunch. The Great Hall was warm and full of the noise of several hundred students, the December sky in the enchanted ceiling solid grey with the promise of snow that had been promising itself for a week. Harry sat in his usual spot at the Gryffindor table between Ron and across from Hermione, Neville on Hermione's left, the comfortable specific geography of where they'd all ended up after 3 months of choosing. Hermione looked at him with the patient attention she used when she was waiting for information she'd been promised. Ron said, "Iris came to practice. She sat on the goalpost for an hour. Oliver tried to shoo her and she bit him." "She does that," Harry said. "Fred and George are calling her the team's emotional support owl." "She'd object to that," Harry said. "She considers herself a tactical asset." "Can owls—" Ron started, then looked at Iris's general behavior history and reconsidered. "Never mind. What happened last night?" "The whole castle knows something happened. Seamus says he heard something from the 6th years, Dean thinks it was a troll again." "It wasn't a troll," Hermione said. "Quarrels in the hospital wing," Neville said. He said it quietly, not as gossip. He'd noticed, Harry thought, because Neville noticed things about people that other people missed, filed them without judgment, and produced them at relevant moments. "He is," Harry said. "He'll be all right." He looked at the three of them, Ron with his genuine direct concern, Hermione with her controlled worry and waiting questions, Neville with his steady quiet attention. "I'll tell you everything properly." "Not here." "Tonight," Hermione said. "Tonight," Harry confirmed. "Common room, after dinner, when the room's clear." He served himself some lunch. "Also Neville, the greenhouse. Is Sprout still in there in the evenings?" Neville blinked at the shift. "Usually till about 6. I need to ask her about a plant I've been thinking about. Something specific to soul magic." He ate some potato. "I'll ask after dinner." "Soul magic," Ron said, with the tone of someone who was keeping up by maintaining forward momentum. "Right. The thing you can't tell me about yet." "I can tell you more than I could a month ago," Harry said. "The shape of it is," he considered how to say it simply, without the 15 layers of context. "There's a piece of Voldemort's soul in my scar. Morgan's going to remove it. When that's done and when we've dealt with the other pieces he's hidden, he won't be able to come back in any permanent sense." He watched them process this. "That's the project. It's not a short one." Ron had gone still in the way he went still when something was serious. He was not, Harry had found over 3 months, someone who defaulted to seriousness. He was instinctively light, quick to humor, better at absorbing things through action than through sitting with them. But when something needed him to be solid, he was, with the uncomplicated thoroughness of someone who had never been taught that emotions were things to manage rather than feel. "Piece of his soul," Ron said. In the scar. Since you were 1. "Yes." Ron was quiet for a moment. Then, "Is that why you sometimes get the headaches? During Quirrell's class?" Harry looked at him. Ron shrugged, slightly defensive. "I notice things. I just don't always say." "Yes," Harry said. "That's why." "Right," Ron said, and something settled in his face, resolution, the specific kind that arrived when someone decided something and stopped deliberating. "Then we deal with it. What do you need?" Harry looked at Ron. At Hermione, who had the expression of someone who'd had the same resolution a week ago and was glad everyone else was arriving at it. At Neville, who was looking at his lunch with the careful manner of someone who had decided he was in without needing to announce it. "I'll tell you tonight," Harry said. All of it. The enchanted ceiling shifted overhead. The gray broke for a moment and a thin winter sun came through, casting the great hall in a different light, the candles warmer, the house colors brighter, the faces around the long table specific and real and present. Harry looked up at it and thought about the woman who'd spent 3 months in a cold castle in the 7th century making the ceiling do exactly this. He thought about the letter in his inside pocket, the one from his father. Don't let anyone talk you into small. He thought about the vault and the sword on its plinth, still waiting. I remember what was given. I wait for what is owed. He thought about Merlin in Dumbledore's office, handing him tea at 5 in the morning in the hospital wing, writing in the margins of books at the long table in the hall, saying what he does with it is his, not ours. He thought about Morgan on the cliff top, the wind shifting, patterns and improvisation aren't actually separate skills, and in the courtyard with her hands loose at her sides, and in the vault doorway looking at him hold Excalibur with that expression she didn't try to manage. He thought about the prophecy, which was a true statement about a state that currently existed. A state he intended to change. He looked at his 3 friends, at the people he'd found in a bookshop and on a train and in a common room, who had become in 3 months a specific constellation that he suspected was going to be the one he navigated by for the rest of his life. Eat your lunch, Hermione said, with the combination of warmth and practicality that was entirely her. You look like you haven't slept. I haven't, Harry said. Then eat, and sleep, and tonight we talk. She looked at him with her precise directness. We're going to need you at full capacity. We're going to need all of us, Harry said. Hermione nodded once, decisively, the way she nodded when something had been decided. Ron was already passing him bread with the cheerful practicality of someone who expressed care through logistics. Neville had produced an extra apple from somewhere and put it near Harry's plate with the quiet particular thoughtfulness that was the most Neville thing he did. Harry ate his lunch. Above them the enchanted ceiling shifted again, grey and deep and honest, December settling over the Scottish mountains the way it had been settling for centuries, the castle under it old and sure of itself, the ancient wards and the foundations doing what they'd always done, recognizing, containing, holding. Somewhere below the castle, in the 3rd-floor corridor, the mirror stood in the dark with the stone inside it, waiting. In the east wing, in the room that Merlin had never told Morgan about, something sat in an unremarkable corner doing nothing in particular. In the room of requirement on the 7th floor, a diadem sat among centuries of other people's hidden things, patient. In a study in Malfoy Manor, a diary that was also something much worse than a diary sat in a desk drawer. In a cave by a Scottish sea, a locket. In a vault, a cup. Around Voldemort's snake familiar, Nagini, who moved through the dark places of the world like something that had always been there. And in Hogwarts, first year, Gryffindor, eating his lunch because Hermione had told him to and Ron had given him bread and Neville had provided an apple, was Harry Potter, raised by Merlin and Morgan Le Fay, heir of Excalibur, son of Lily's sacrifice and James's love and 15 centuries of Pendragon blood, carrier of a scar he was going to lose and a destiny he was going to choose and a war he was going to finish on his own terms. He had time. He had tools. He had people. The board was upended. He was just getting started.